Vera Ashworth had learned, over the course of 6 years of teaching at Mrs. Pemberton's Academy for Young Ladies, that certain letters arrived with particular heaviness. They sat on desk corners like stones. They weighed down correspondence trays as though deliberately testing the structural integrity of furniture. This letter, cream-colored, sealed with unfamiliar wax, addressed in handwriting she did not recognize, possessed exactly that quality of consequential weight. She held it in her right hand, feeling the slight tremor that emerged whenever anxiety visited her. October light slanted through the schoolroom window, illuminating dust motes that seemed, in that moment, to possess more certainty regarding their purpose than Vera possessed regarding hers. She had 32 students to teach. She had composition assignments awaiting review. She had precisely 3 minutes before the morning lesson commenced. And yet she stood, motionless, staring at a letter that somehow suggested everything was about to change. "Miss Ashworth?" Charlotte Wells appeared in the doorway, her golden blonde hair arranged in fashionable waves that Vera could never quite manage to maintain despite Charlotte's frequent attempts at instruction. "The girls are assembled. Mrs. Pemberton is asking whether you require a moment or whether you are prepared to begin literature discussion." Vera placed the letter deliberately into the pocket of her grey wool dress. "I am quite prepared," she said, though something in her voice must have betrayed the lie, because Charlotte's bright blue eyes narrowed with the particular concern of one who had been Vera's student before becoming her friend. "You're not well," Charlotte observed, closing the schoolroom door with deliberate care. "You have the expression you wear when mathematics makes your head feel as though it contains too many calculations simultaneously." "A letter arrived," Vera admitted, which was both complete honesty and deliberate evasion. "Of no particular significance." "Then why?" Charlotte asked, moving toward the window and positioning herself so that afternoon light caught her most flattering angle, a habit that suggested her primary education had been in drawing-room technique rather than genuine scholarship. "Do you appear as though you have received notification of approaching execution?" The particular absurdity of that observation, delivered with Charlotte's characteristic combination of dramatic exaggeration and genuine kindness, produced something, approaching a smile from Vera. This was what she valued in Charlotte Wells most particularly, the capacity to acknowledge tension without demanding immediate explanation or resolution. "I have not opened it," Vera said quietly. Charlotte turned, studying her with sudden genuine seriousness that made her appear considerably older and more intelligent than her typical social manner suggested. "Do you wish to open it now?" The lesson awaited. 32 young women were positioned in the schoolroom, texts prepared, minds ostensibly ready to engage with Mr. Wordsworth's observations regarding memory and emotion. Mrs. Pemberton was, at this precise moment, glancing toward the door with that particular expression of professional patience that preceded polite but firm reminders regarding punctuality. Vera withdrew the letter and broke the seal. The handwriting itself contained authority, not the elaborate flourishes of someone demonstrating capability through decorative technique, but rather the efficient precision of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The letter was brief, which somehow made it worse than elaborate. "Miss Vera Magdalene Ashworth, Governess and Instructor, Mrs. Pemberton's Academy for Young Ladies, London. My dear Miss Ashworth, circumstances of recent transformation have created necessity for immediate resolution of certain practical matters. I believe you to be ideally suited to address said circumstances. I would be grateful if you would consent to meeting with my physician, Captain Thomas Henry Blackwood, who will provide comprehensive information regarding a proposal that I believe you will find advantageous to your current situation. Captain Blackwood will present himself at your residence on Friday next at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I trust you will find yourself available. Your obedient servant, LHA. No signature, merely initials. The sort of letter that suggested either tremendous confidence or tremendous carelessness regarding identification. "Vera?" Charlotte's voice came from considerable distance, though she stood merely 2 feet away. "Your face has achieved the precise color of particularly old porcelain. What does it say?" Vera read the letter twice more, as though additional readings might produce clarity that the initial perusal had failed to provide. A meeting with a physician, a proposal, something advantageous to her current situation, which was, in Vera's estimation, reasonably stable. Modest but reliable employment, quarters in Mrs. Pemberton's household, sufficient funds for both necessities and the occasional small luxury, and work that possessed genuine meaning and purpose. "Someone wishes me to meet a physician," Vera said slowly. for purposes of discussing a proposal of unspecified nature. Charlotte's entire demeanor shifted. The theatrical brightness evaporated, replaced by the shrewd assessment that suggested why, despite her limited intellectual capabilities, she had survived the highly competitive world of society marriage negotiations. An advantageous proposal? Those words suggest matrimony. The letter trembled slightly in Vera's hand. She had been, at 26 years of age, offered for and refused 3 times. Each refusal had been made from conviction that marriage without genuine regard would constitute a betrayal of her own capabilities and integrity. Her mother had called this stubbornness. Her father's solicitor had called it impractical. Mrs. Pemberton had simply observed, without judgment, that some women were suited to the married state and others were suited to professional purpose. Vera had believed herself suited to the latter. "I should attend to the girls," she said. "You should open the letter with full capacity for processing its contents," Charlotte corrected, "which means you should sit down, breathe properly, and determine whether you wish to accept whatever meeting has been arranged. The girls can study independently for a brief period. Mrs. Pemberton will understand." But Vera was already moving toward the schoolroom, the letter secure in her pocket, her mind fragmenting in directions that would be entirely inappropriate to display before students who required her to be composed, knowledgeable, and capable of conducting intelligent discourse regarding romantic poetry. She entered to the respectful silence that indicated her students had been trained appropriately, and she stood before them feeling, for perhaps the first time in her professional career, that the person they perceived, Miss Vera Ashworth, their governess and instructor, was someone substantially different from the woman whose hands trembled slightly while holding chalk. "We will continue our discussion of Mr. Wordsworth," she said. "Please provide your observations regarding the manner in which memory functions within Tintern Abbey. Consider particularly the poem's suggestion that emotion becomes more profound rather than less profound with passage of time." The girls opened their texts. The schoolroom settled into the particular quiet of focused engagement, and Vera conducted the discussion with her typical competence, while her mind circled endlessly around 4 initials and a physician's appointment scheduled for Friday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Friday arrived with the particular inevitability of all things one simultaneously dreads and anticipates. Vera had spent the intervening days oscillating between conviction that she should dismiss the entire matter as the elaborate prank of someone with excessive time and peculiar humor, and anxiety that the proposal in question might constitute the sort of opportunity that a woman of modest means could not responsibly refuse. She had confided in Mrs. Pemberton, who had listened with the particular patience of someone who had managed a school for 3 decades and therefore possessed considerable experience with unexpected developments and human complexity. The headmistress had simply observed that Vera possessed sufficient good judgment to evaluate the proposal, once she understood its terms, and that should the proposal prove unsuitable, Vera's position at the academy would remain secure. This statement, meant to be reassuring, had somehow increased rather than decreased Vera's anxiety. Charlotte had insisted upon remaining in the adjacent room, positioned to intervene should Captain Blackwood prove to be anything other than precisely what his letter suggested. This demonstration of loyalty, undertaken despite Vera's firm instruction that such precaution was unnecessary, had produced a surge of affection that Vera found difficult to articulate. At precisely 3 o'clock, Captain Thomas Henry Blackwood presented himself at the small sitting room where Vera had arranged herself with conscious attention to appearance. She had selected her second-best dress, the dove-grey wool with modest lace at the collar, reasoning that excessive elegance would suggest either vanity or desperation, while insufficient attention to appearance might be perceived as disrespect. She had pinned her hair with particular care, ensuring that the escaped tendrils she could never quite control were, at minimum, artfully arranged, rather than appearing genuinely disheveled. The man who entered bore the particular bearing of someone accustomed to making himself agreeable across significant social and professional distances. His dark brown eyes held considerable warmth, despite the obvious seriousness of his purpose. The scar visible on the right side of his neck, partially concealed by his collar, suggested military experience that had proceeded beyond the purely ceremonial. "Miss Ashworth," he said, making a respectful bow that demonstrated knowledge of proper formality without excessive ornamentation. "I am Captain Thomas Henry Blackwood, physician and by extension of circumstance, rather than any particular expertise in matrimonial arrangements, intermediary in a proposal that I confess is extraordinary. even by the standards of my acquaintance. Vera gestured toward the chair opposite her own. Please be seated, Captain. I trust you will forgive my directness, but I believe we might most efficiently progress by acknowledging that I am genuinely uncertain regarding the circumstances which necessitate your presence. He settled himself with the easy capability of someone accustomed to physical comfort in any environment, and something about that ease, the absence of the rigid formality that characterized most men of her acquaintance, made her feel slightly less as though she was drowning in uncertainty. The gentleman who has engaged my services, Captain Blackwood began, has recently returned from military engagement and finds himself confronted with circumstances requiring rapid resolution. He is a man of considerable means and respectable position. He seeks a wife not from sentiment or romantic inclination, but from practical necessity. This is not, I recognize, the ideal foundation for matrimony. However, he is prepared to offer financial security, respectable position, and complete autonomy regarding any intellectual pursuits you might wish to undertake. Vera's hands, which had been maintaining careful stillness in her lap, clenched slightly. The gentleman remains unnamed? He believes it advantageous that you evaluate the proposal on its merits, rather than on the basis of his identity, Captain Blackwood replied. Should you decline, the matter ceases entirely. Should you consent to consider further, he will present himself and provide such information as you require. This is exceptionally irregular, Vera observed, though even as she spoke, she recognized that her primary emotion was not offense, but rather fascination. The entire arrangement possessed the quality of something from literature, the kind of scenario that appeared in novels but rarely in actual experience. It is, Captain Blackwood acknowledged, extraordinarily so. I will also observe that the gentleman in question is a man of considerable personal discipline and integrity. I would not be standing before you, Miss Ashworth, were I not entirely convinced of his honorable intentions and his genuine belief that this arrangement could be mutually advantageous. What does he require of me? Vera asked. Beyond the obvious expectation that I fulfill the duties of a wife? Captain Blackwood smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face from serious to remarkably warm. That, Miss Ashworth, is the question that demonstrates precisely why he believes you to be suited to this arrangement. He requires a woman of intelligence, capability, and genuine character. He requires someone who will not be destroyed by his current temperament or his residual difficulty in processing certain experiences of the war years. He requires essentially a partner rather than a dependent. Whether such partnership extends to romantic affection is, he confessed to me, a matter he considers secondary to finding a woman who will not despise him for his current limitations. The honesty of that statement, the particular vulnerability it contained, struck Vera with surprising force. She found herself thinking of her former students, the young women she had taught, and how many of them she had watched marry men who viewed them as ornaments or financial acquisitions, rather than as actual human beings, deserving of respect and genuine regard. I require time to consider, she said. He anticipated as much, Captain Blackwood replied, rising from his chair. I will present myself again on Monday next at the same hour to receive your response. Should you consent to meet with him, I will convey his address, and arrangements will proceed accordingly. Should you decline, I will convey your decision with complete respect for your autonomy in the matter. He moved toward the door, then paused. I will tell you one additional matter, Miss Ashworth, as a man who has known my associate for considerable time. He is a person of genuine worth, who has been profoundly tested by circumstance. Should you choose to accept this proposal, I believe you will discover that the effort required to build something genuine with him will be compensated by the satisfaction of knowing you have genuinely seen and known another human being in their full complexity. After he departed, Vera sat in the gathering dimness of afternoon light, the weight of potential futures pressing against her with considerable force. Charlotte emerged from the adjacent room, her expression anxious. Well, she demanded. I do not know, Vera admitted. I do not know whether this is opportunity or catastrophe. I do not know whether I am capable of marriage to a stranger. I do not know whether refusing, when Mrs. Pemberton's patronage cannot extend indefinitely, and my position, however satisfying, remains ultimately precarious, would constitute principle or merely foolishness. Charlotte sat beside her, taking her hand with the easy affection of genuine friendship. Then you have 4 days to determine the answers to those questions, which is, I suspect, precisely why he granted you time rather than demanding immediate response. The schoolroom felt different after Friday's announcement. Vera found herself observing her students with the particular intensity of someone considering how one's own circumstances might have prevented occupying their positions. These girls, ages 14 to 18, from families of reasonable means and social standing, had futures that extended in relatively predictable directions. Marriage was the primary expectation, though a few might be permitted to remain unmarried should family position and financial security provide alternative options. Vera had believed herself to be among those alternatives. She had believed her position as governess and instructor provided sufficient autonomy and purpose to constitute a complete life. Yet now, confronted with the reality that such positions remained fundamentally dependent upon the continued goodwill of employers and the security of institutional frameworks, she recognized that autonomy was somewhat illusory. On Saturday, she requested a private meeting with Mrs. Pemberton, who received her in the headmistress's study, a room of considerable order and intellectual substance, its walls lined with books suggesting a woman whose learning had not ceased upon achieving professional position. "I have received a proposal of marriage," Vera said, with the directness that had become habitual between them over 6 years of professional relationship, "from a gentleman of whom I know nothing beyond his initials and the assertion that he possesses means and position. I am uncertain whether to accept or decline, and I wish to understand your perspective before proceeding." Mrs. Pemberton, a woman of approximately 58 years with steel-grey hair and the bearing of someone who had managed her own education and professional establishment without assistance from any male relative, set down her pen with deliberate care. "Tell me everything," she commanded, and Vera did. The letter, Captain Blackwood's visit, the peculiar arrangement, the proposal's fundamental acknowledgement that romantic sentiment was not its basis. When Vera concluded, Mrs. Pemberton rose and moved toward the window overlooking the schoolyard, where several younger students were engaged in supervised walking and conversation. "I have known you for 6 years, Miss Ashworth. In that time, I have observed you to be a woman of considerable intelligence, genuine integrity, and the capacity to build authentic connection with students across significant differences in experience and background. You are capable, reliable, and genuinely committed to your work." She turned to face Vera directly. "However, I will tell you something you may not wish to hear. This position, while it provides meaningful work and reasonable security, is ultimately limiting. You will not advance beyond it. Your salary, while adequate, will never provide for true independence. Should I die or should this academy close, you would be vulnerable to the vicissitudes of circumstance. Your intelligence and capability position you for something more extensive than what this role can offer." "Are you suggesting that I should accept?" Vera asked, uncertain whether she felt relief or disappointment at this frank assessment. "I am suggesting that you evaluate the proposal not against some romantic ideal of marriage, but against the realistic alternative, continued employment of a respectable but ultimately constrained nature. Should the gentleman in question be, as Captain Blackwood suggests, a man of integrity and genuine character, then a marriage founded on mutual respect and genuine regard might constitute a far more advantageous arrangement than society typically permits women to negotiate." Vera left that conversation with her uncertainty not resolved, but somehow clarified. She was being asked to choose not between love and practicality, but between two different forms of constrained life, one offering meaning but limited independence, the other offering security and potential intellectual partnership, though potentially requiring significant emotional labor regarding her husband's residual damage from military service. On Sunday morning, she attended church and found herself listening to the sermon regarding surrender and faith with particular attention. The vicar spoke of the manner in which genuine growth required willingness to abandon certainty and embrace possibility. The language was entirely generic, the sentiment universally applicable, and yet Vera found herself wondering whether divine intention operated through such unlikely circumstances. That afternoon, she wrote a letter to her mother, a woman who had spent nearly 30 years managing an increasingly limited household budget following Vera's father's death. She described the proposal without providing identifying details and asked her mother's perspective regarding whether a woman of intelligence and capability could find genuine satisfaction in a marriage arranged from practical necessity rather than romantic inclination. Her mother's response, which arrived Monday morning by express post, was characteristically practical. Your father and I married because his position and our family's circumstances made us suitable to one another. We would not have described our initial connection as romantic, yet over 30 years, we built something genuine: partnership, mutual respect, shared purpose. That something was, in my reckoning, far more valuable than whatever romantic passion might have existed initially. If the gentleman in question is indeed a man of character, then the capacity for such partnership may be more readily available to you than you recognize. At 3 o'clock on Monday afternoon, Captain Blackwood presented himself again. Vera, having spent 4 days in considerable thought and having consulted with those whose perspectives she valued, was ready to provide her response. "I consent to meet with the gentleman," she said, "provided that he will answer such questions as I require regarding his circumstances, his intentions, and his expectations of this arrangement." Captain Blackwood's expression registered something approaching relief. "He will welcome the opportunity to address your questions directly, Miss Ashworth. He has requested that you present yourself at his residence on Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. He will provide his address and arrange for conveyance, should you require it." Vera accepted the address written on cream-colored paper. The location was in Mayfair, a respectable though not ostentatious district, suggesting either genuine means or deliberate avoidance of excessive display. She had 4 days to prepare herself for meeting a stranger who might, through some extraordinary circumstance, become her husband. The carriage that arrived at 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon displayed no particular crest or identifying mark, which Vera found somehow reassuring. Excessive ornamentation would have suggested either vanity or deliberate attempt to impress. The vehicle was well maintained, comfortable, and entirely practical, qualities that suggested someone concerned with functionality rather than display. The residence on Mount Street proved similarly understated, a townhouse of respectable size positioned on a quiet street, displaying the kind of quiet wealth that came from genuine means rather than recent acquisition. The servant who opened the door was an older man whose bearing suggested decades of professional service rather than superficial courtesy. She was shown directly to a study, a room lined with books, illuminated by evening candlelight that cast warm shadows across organized shelves and a substantial desk. The room smelled of leather, paper, and something she could not immediately identify, which she eventually recognized as the particular scent of a man who had spent considerable time in outdoor military service. He stood as she entered, moving with the deliberate care of someone who remained perpetually aware of the space occupied by his body and the potential consequences of careless movement. His face, in candlelight, bore the particular wear of the scarring she had not anticipated, though Captain Blackwood had not failed to mention it. What surprised her was not the scar itself, but the direct manner in which he regarded her, not with the surface politeness of men accustomed to social interaction, but with the intensity of genuine observation. "Miss Ashworth," he said, his voice deep and measured in a manner that suggested considerable self-control, "I am grateful that you have consented to meet with me. I recognize that the manner in which I have approached this matter is extraordinarily irregular. I will endeavor to explain my reasoning." They settled into chairs positioned before a fireplace where flames provided additional warmth and light. He did not offer refreshment immediately, which somehow made her trust him more. He was not attempting to perform the role of gracious host. He was attempting to be honest. "I have recently returned from military engagement," he began. "The experience has left me with residual effects, physical and otherwise, that render me unsuitable for the conventional marriage market. Additionally, I find myself at a point in my life where I require partnership more than I require romantic passion, though I will acknowledge that neither is irrelevant to my interest in matrimony." He paused, as though carefully selecting his subsequent words. "Captain Blackwood and I served together. I confided in him regarding my situation. He suggested that I might seek a woman of intelligence and genuine character, rather than a woman selected on the basis of conventional beauty or family connection. He specifically mentioned you, though not from any personal knowledge, but rather from observations made by mutual acquaintances regarding your reputation for integrity and intellectual capability." "You are a stranger to me," Vera said quietly. "Even with Captain Blackwood's recommendation, I would be accepting the proposal of someone whose identity remains fundamentally unknown to me." "Yes," he agreed, without apology or excuse. "That is precisely why I have granted you this meeting. You may ask whatever you wish. I will answer with complete honesty. Should you find my answers unsatisfactory, The matter ceases entirely, and you will leave this residence with my respect and genuine appreciation for your time." Vera found her nervousness beginning to resolve into something approaching focus. She was, after all, an educated woman accustomed to asking difficult questions of her students regarding their reasoning and understanding. "What is your position?" "I hold a title and considerable estates," he replied. "I am not, however, presently engaged in active management of either, as my recent return from military service has rendered me temporarily incapable of providing appropriate attention to such responsibilities." "Your title?" she pressed, understanding that this evasion was deliberate. "I would prefer not to provide that information until you have determined whether you wish to continue this negotiation. Should you decline to accept my proposal, your knowing my identity would be unnecessarily complicated. Should you accept, the revelation will be appropriate at that time." It was a reasonable explanation, though it nonetheless suggested that his identity was significant. Otherwise, why conceal it? "What do you require of a wife?" "Genuine respect for my person and character, intellectual engagement, willingness to support the establishment of a functional household and eventually to participate in the management of estates and title, capacity to bear my children should you prove capable and willing, honesty rather than performance." "Do you expect—" She paused, uncertain whether the question was appropriate, then continued nonetheless. "Do you expect physical, marital relations?" He did not flinch at the directness of the question. "I expect that should you marry me, consummation of that marriage would be expected and I believe mutually beneficial. However, the precise frequency and nature of such relations would be a matter of negotiation between us. I have no interest in subjugating a woman through forced intimacy. I have observed considerable suffering created by that particular expectation, and I do not believe it conducive to either genuine partnership or genuine satisfaction." "You speak as though you have given considerable thought to what constitutes functional marriage," Vera observed. "I have spent considerable time in recent months thinking regarding the precise person I would wish to have as partner," he replied. "Captain Blackwood, in his wisdom, suggested that such partner should be someone whose intelligence matched my own, whose values aligned with mine, and who possessed sufficient character to potentially be improved by association with me rather than damaged by it. He suggested you might be such a person." Vera found herself asking questions for nearly 2 hours. She inquired regarding his financial circumstances, his political beliefs, his attitudes toward women's education and capability, his expectations regarding social position and social responsibilities. She asked regarding his family, his experience with war, his physical limitations, his expectations of her in the event that she could not bear children. He answered everything with remarkable directness. He did not attempt to soften his responses or present himself as other than he was. When he admitted uncertainty regarding some aspect of married life, he said so. When he expressed conviction regarding something, he provided his reasoning clearly. By the time evening had progressed considerably, Vera found that she had formed a reasonably clear sense of the man before her. He was intelligent, genuinely concerned with integrity, and possessed of the kind of honesty that came only from someone who had lived through circumstances sufficiently difficult that social pretense no longer seemed relevant. "I require time to consider," she said finally. "Of course," he replied. "I will expect your response within 1 week. Should you accept, Captain Blackwood will assist with arrangements. Should you decline, I will accept your decision with complete respect." He stood, extending his hand. When she took it, his grip was firm but not aggressive, the handshake of someone accustomed to treating women as actual people rather than as delicate objects. "Thank you, Miss Ashworth, for your time and your honesty. Whatever your decision, I have appreciated this conversation more than I can adequately express." Vera left the residence on Mount Street, feeling as though she had been fundamentally altered by a single evening conversation. She did not yet know whether she would accept his proposal, but she recognized that she had encountered someone capable of genuine honesty, and such encounters were rare enough to constitute a form of gift. The week following her meeting at the Mount Street residence proceeded with the surreal quality of ordinary life continuing while internal transformation occurred. Vera taught her students, responded to their compositions, participated in Mrs. Pemberton's household routine, and maintained the external appearance of normalcy, while her internal landscape shifted dramatically with each passing day. She realized with some surprise, not been attempting to convince herself to accept or decline the proposal. Rather, she had been waiting for some fundamental clarity to emerge, some recognition of what genuine choice, rather than mere circumstance, required of her. On Thursday evening, she took a walk through the gardens near the school, a path she had walked countless times. The autumn landscape was notably advanced. Leaves turned to gold and crimson, grass crystalline from early frost, the world itself demonstrating the capacity for transformation that accompanied the passage of seasons. She thought of her mother, married to a practical man from practical circumstance, who had described their partnership as comprising genuine satisfaction despite the absence of romantic inclination. She thought of Mrs. Pemberton, who had never married and had built a life of considerable purpose and meaning through professional establishment. She thought of Charlotte Wells, engaged to be married to a man she seemed to regard as reasonably pleasant, with the apparent expectation that affection would develop following the wedding. She thought, most significantly, of herself, of the life she was actually living, rather than the life she imagined she was living. She was 26, unmarried in a society where unmarried women were considered increasingly anomalous as they advanced in age. She was employed, but her employment remained fundamentally dependent upon external circumstances. She possessed intelligence and capability that her current position permitted her to exercise only in relation to education. Meaningful work, certainly, but work that remained ultimately circumscribed. The gentleman on Mount Street had offered something unexpected, a partnership that acknowledged her capabilities while providing the security that her current position, however satisfying, could never guarantee. He had offered respect. He had offered intellectual engagement. He had offered the possibility of genuine partnership rather than mere dependency. What he had not offered was romantic passion. What he had not offered was the kind of love that featured in literature and in the daydreams of young women. What he had offered was something potentially more valuable, honest acknowledgement of what both parties actually required from one another, combined with apparent commitment to building something genuine from that foundation. She returned to her room and wrote her response. She would accept his proposal. She would trust Captain Blackwood's assessment of his character. She would commit to approaching this marriage, not with resignation, but with genuine intention to build authentic partnership. The letter to the gentleman remained unnamed, was brief. Sir, I consent to your proposal. I accept your offer of marriage with the understanding that I shall approach this commitment with complete honesty and genuine intention to build something of value between us. I am prepared to meet with Captain Blackwood on Monday next to discuss arrangements. Your obedient servant, VMA. She did not reread the letter before sealing it. To have reread would have permitted doubt to emerge. Instead, she delivered it immediately to Captain Blackwood through the postal service, with instruction for express delivery. Monday's meeting occurred in Mrs. Pemberton's study, with the headmistress present to ensure propriety and to protect Vera's interests. Captain Blackwood presented a contract, surprisingly straightforward, establishing Vera's financial security should the marriage be dissolved through the gentleman's death or through other circumstance. He also presented the gentleman's name, written on a single sheet of paper, Lucas Henry Ashford, Duke of Ravenswood. The name meant nothing to Vera initially. She repeated it, attempting to generate some recognition or memory. Nothing emerged except a vague sense of familiarity regarding the surname, which was likely coincidental. The Duke has requested that you present yourself at his residence on Friday evening for the ceremony, Captain Blackwood explained. It will be a small affair. The Duke's mother, myself, several witnesses of the Duke's selection. The ceremony will be followed by dinner. You will then travel to his country estate to establish yourself as Duchess and to permit the Duke to introduce you to his household. Vera understood that she was being moved with considerable rapidity toward a marriage. The entire arrangement, from letter to decision to ceremony, would have occurred within a matter of weeks. She found that the speed itself was oddly reassuring. It did not permit sufficient time for overthinking or second-guessing. She was being propelled forward by circumstance and her own decision, and she would either discover that she had chosen wisely or would discover the alternative. The Duke has requested that I convey one additional message, Captain Blackwood continued. He wishes you to understand that he has formed, from your meetings and from his knowledge of your reputation, the belief that you possess the capacity to see him clearly as a human being, rather than as either a title or a symbol of authority. He considers that capacity to be extraordinarily valuable. He wishes you to know that he is approaching this marriage with genuine hope that authentic partnership may eventually develop between you. Vera found her eyes unexpectedly moisture. She recognized that the gentleman, the Duke, was offering something that might actually constitute the foundation for something genuine, the acknowledgement that each would approach this arrangement as a full human being, capable of growth and transformation, rather than as a collection of social functions. "I understand," she said quietly. The ceremony occurred on Friday evening in the small chapel attached to the residence on Mount Street. Vera wore a dress of pale blue silk that Mrs. Pemberton had insisted was more appropriate for a bride than the grey wool that had become her habitual uniform. Her mother attended, having travelled from her modest residence in Derbyshire. The Duke's mother, Lady Margaret Ashford, Dowager Duchess, demonstrated remarkable warmth, embracing Vera after the ceremony with apparent genuine affection. The Duke himself seemed focused and resolved, but also, Vera observed, uncertain. She recognized in him the quality of someone who had made a significant commitment and was now confronted with the actual commencement of that commitment. When they were alone together briefly after the ceremony, he took her hand gently. "You are brave," he said, "to accept marriage to a stranger based primarily on reputation and a single evening conversation." "And you are wise," Vera replied, "to have permitted that conversation to occur. Had you demanded immediate acceptance without such opportunity for evaluation, I might have perceived you as a man, more interested in acquisition than in partnership." Something that might have been a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Then perhaps we have chosen correctly, Miss Ashworth, or rather, Mrs. Ashford now, I believe." Vera realized that she had not thought carefully about the fact that her name would change, that she would no longer be Miss Ashworth, but would become the Duchess of Ravenswood. She had accepted a proposal without truly accepting the magnitude of the transformation it represented. She did not permit herself to overthink this realization. Instead, she squeezed the Duke's hand gently and said, "Yes, I believe we may have chosen correctly." The townhouse on Mount Street felt different when entered as its mistress rather than as a visitor. Servants moved through corridors with deliberate quietness, their expressions carefully neutral in the manner of professional domestics who understood that wedding nights possessed a particular significance that required discretion and tact. Vera had been shown to the mistress's chambers, a room of considerable elegance appointed with delicate furnishings that suggested the previous duchess's tastes had run toward the ornamental. She stood at the window overlooking the gaslit street below, still wearing the pale blue silk of her wedding dress, though the elaborate styling had been released from its pins. Her mother had departed hours earlier, having provided whispered advice regarding wifely duties that was simultaneously embarrassingly explicit and remarkably vague. Charlotte had embraced her with tears and warnings to be brave and permit him to show you what genuine partnership between man and woman might constitute. The Duke had not appeared since dinner had concluded. Vera understood that he was permitting her time to prepare herself, to whatever extent preparation was possible, for an event that society treated as simultaneously ordinary and monumentally significant. When he entered, moving through the connecting door that joined the master's chambers to hers, he was wearing a simple dark robe and carried no candle, relying instead on the fire that burned low in the hearth. He paused at the threshold, as though granting her the opportunity to object to his presence. When she did not, he moved forward with deliberate slowness. "I will not require anything that causes you genuine distress," he said quietly. "That is my sincere commitment. Should you wish me to cease at any point, you have only to say so." Vera found herself nodding, uncertain whether her voice would function appropriately. She had been taught vaguely what to expect. Society's education regarding marital relations was remarkably circumscribed, delivered through implication and inference rather than direct instruction. Yet she recognized that the Duke was offering something that most women could not expect: respect for her autonomy and genuine concern for her comfort. "I have been told," she heard herself say, "that this is likely to be uncomfortable." "It is possible," he acknowledged, "though not necessarily inevitable. Much depends upon the care taken by one's partner and upon one's own capability to relax into the experience." He moved closer, and she recognized that he was giving her time to accustom herself to his proximity. He reached toward her face, his large hand gentle, tracing the line of her cheekbone with considerable care. "Your hair," he said softly, "is precisely the color I was told it was, rich chestnut with auburn lights. I have been curious regarding this for some time." She turned to face him more fully, and he began removing the remaining pins from her hair with surprising dexterity. The gesture was oddly intimate, more intimate, perhaps, than the actual physical act that followed. He seemed genuinely interested in the texture and weight of her hair, running his fingers through it with evident appreciation. She found herself reaching toward him in return, her hands touching his shoulders through the thin fabric of his robe. The intimacy that followed was not precisely what she had expected. It contained elements of discomfort and awkwardness, yet it also contained unexpected tenderness and a quality of genuine engagement that suggested the Duke was not merely fulfilling marital obligation, but was genuinely attempting to build something with her. He attended to her comfort with apparent seriousness. He permitted her to establish boundaries and respected them. He spoke to her throughout, murmuring encouragement and solicitude, treating her as a partner in the experience rather than as a vessel through which he was simply exercising his rights. Afterward, as they lay together in the dimness of firelight, Vera found herself remarkably calm. The experience had been neither as frightening as some whispered conversations had suggested, nor as transcendent as others had implied. It had simply been human, awkward in some ways, genuine in others, containing the particular quality of two people attempting to build something new together. "You are trembling," he observed, his arm around her in a gesture that felt protective without being controlling. "Nervousness," she admitted. "Residual awareness that I am now entirely dependent upon your goodwill for my continued security and position." She felt him shift slightly, moving to prop himself up on one elbow so that he could regard her directly. Even in the low light, she could perceive the intensity of his gaze. "I will not require you to be anything other than yourself," he said, with the same deliberate honesty that had characterized his entire approach to their arrangement. "I will not abuse the power that position grants me. I will not use your dependence as weapon or tool." This is not merely assurance provided for comfort, it is genuine commitment, made with full understanding of the weight it carries. Vera found herself reaching toward his face, her fingers encountering the scar that ran from eyebrow to jaw. She traced it gently, and he remained perfectly still, permitting the exploration. "How did you acquire this?" she asked. "Military engagement in the peninsula," he replied. "Close combat with a Spanish officer who was remarkably skilled. I survived because he was trained to disable rather than merely destroy. Had his objective been purely to kill, I would not be present in this bed." There was no self-pity in the statement, merely fact delivered with military precision. She understood that he was offering her the truth of his experience, without requirement that she console or absolve him. "You survived," she said simply, "and you have chosen to build something new, despite that survival coming at considerable cost." "We have both chosen," he corrected gently. "Do not diminish your own courage by recognizing only mine. You have accepted marriage to a stranger from practical necessity, yet you have approached it with deliberate intention to make something genuine rather than merely endurable. That requires its own form of courage." As the night progressed and they eventually slept, Vera found herself thinking of how remarkably different this experience was from what she had anticipated. She had expected either cruelty or indifference, the two poles toward which she had assumed male behavior would tend. Instead, she had encountered something far more unusual. A man who seemed genuinely interested in building authentic connection with her, who seemed to recognize that his power over her created responsibility rather than mere opportunity. She did not yet love him, but as she drifted towards sleep with his arm protective around her, she recognized that genuine partnership might eventually be possible between them, and that recognition alone seemed, in that moment, to constitute something approaching grace. The journey to Ravenswood Estate required 2 days of travel, accomplished through well-maintained roads and at a pace designed to ensure Vera's comfort rather than maximum speed. She observed the landscape transitioning from the urbanity of London toward increasingly rural countryside, and she found herself studying her husband with careful observation during these hours of enforced proximity. Lucas, she had begun thinking of him by his given name following the intimacy of their wedding night, was a man of considerable quietness. He did not require constant conversation or entertainment. He seemed equally comfortable in companionable silence or in genuine discussion. He read extensively, had strong opinions regarding literature and philosophy, and displayed the particular quality of intelligence that came from both formal education and genuine experience of the world. Most significantly, he seemed to regard her as a person worthy of such engagement. When she offered an observation regarding a text they were both reading, he considered it carefully rather than dismissing it or responding with perfunctory courtesy. When she asked questions, he answered with the assumption that she was genuinely seeking information and understanding, rather than merely making conversation. The estate itself announced its significance long before the actual residence became visible. Extensive grounds, carefully maintained despite recent abandonment of active management, suggested generations of careful stewardship. The house, when it finally appeared, was neither the Gothic fantasy she had vaguely imagined, nor the austere fortress that might have seemed to match Lucas's fundamental nature. Instead, it was a substantial country home of Jacobean architecture, built of pale stone that glowed warmly in afternoon light. "Ravenswood has been in the family for 4 centuries, Lucas explained as they approached. "My father made significant improvements in the previous generation. The current condition is somewhat less immaculate than it was prior to my absence, as I have not been positioned to provide the attention it deserves. You will find that there is considerable opportunity for the implementation of your own vision regarding household management." Vera understood that he was offering her genuine responsibility and autonomy regarding the household rather than merely symbolic position. She also understood that the condition of the estate was not, as he suggested, merely a matter of neglect during his military service. It carried the weight of recent profound change: death of his father, his own departure for military engagement, years of absence from the familiar landscape. The servants lined the entrance, a household of approximately 30 individuals, from elderly retainers who had served multiple generations of Ashfords to younger servants hired in recent years. An older woman of approximately 60 stepped forward, her expression combining welcome with evident anxiety. "Your Grace," she said, making a respectful curtsy to Vera, "we are honored to receive you as mistress of Ravenswood. I am Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, housekeeper. Should you require any information regarding household management or the layout of the estate, I am at your entire disposal." Vera recognized in Mrs. Hartwell's careful formality and the evident anxiety underlying her courtesy, a woman who had managed the household alone during Lucas's absence and who was uncertain regarding how his marriage would alter her responsibilities and position. She extended her hand in greeting rather than remaining coldly formal. "Mrs. Hartwell, I am grateful for your stewardship during the Duke's absence. I am entirely inexperienced regarding the management of an estate of this magnitude, and I will rely upon your knowledge and experience to assist me in understanding what such management actually requires. I hope we will be able to work together to restore Ravenswood to the condition it deserves." She observed visible relief cross the older woman's face. Mrs. Hartwell had been uncertain whether the new Duchess would regard her as an obstacle to be managed or as a valuable resource to be preserved. The interior of the estate revealed both the beauty of its architectural heritage and the marks of years of insufficient attention. Elegant rooms contained furniture that required polishing, paintings hung in need of cleaning, carpets and tapestries required restoration. Yet the bones of the house were excellent, and Vera recognized immediately that she possessed an opportunity for meaningful work in the restoration of this residence to proper condition. That evening, dining alone with Lucas in the massive dining room, a space that would accommodate 50 guests though presently contained only 2, Vera voiced the observation that had emerged during her tour of the property. "The estate is underutilized," she said. "The rooms, the grounds, the infrastructure, all of it is capable of supporting far more activity than currently exists. You maintain a household of substantial size, yet they have minimal actual work to occupy their time." "Yes," Lucas replied, without apparent defensiveness. "This has been the reality since my father's death. I inherited both the estate and the responsibility, yet I was neither emotionally nor practically positioned to execute that responsibility effectively." "You could establish a purpose that would justify their employment and provide them with meaningful work," Vera suggested carefully. "The estate could host house parties. You could undertake restoration of the gardens. You could be more actively involved in the welfare of the tenantry and the village. You could transform Ravenswood from a house that exists primarily to maintain itself into a house that serves an actual purpose beyond its own perpetuation." She watched him consider this with evident seriousness. "You are suggesting that I should be more engaged with my responsibilities?" "I am suggesting that you should determine what you actually wish this estate and this position to accomplish, and then organize everything toward that purpose," Vera clarified. "At present it seems to exist almost as a memorial to what it was, rather than as something actively functional in the present." "You have been here for approximately 4 hours," Lucas observed, a note of something approaching amusement in his voice, "and you have already identified the fundamental dysfunction of this household and proposed solutions. This is precisely why Captain Blackwood recommended you so emphatically. He recommended me? Vera asked, surprised by this revelation. He suggested that I would require a woman of intelligence and genuine character, who could see beyond the surface of circumstances and perceive actual possibility, Lucas confirmed. It appears his assessment was remarkably accurate. That night, when he came to her chambers, he carried with him several journals and ledgers relating to estate management. They spent the evening reviewing accounts and discussing the previous direction of the household under his father's management and the current state following years of insufficient oversight. Vera found herself engaged in work that felt genuinely meaningful: analysis of practical matters, identification of inefficiency, conceptualization of better organization. It was work that, she recognized, many women would have found tedious. Yet she found it remarkably engaging, requiring the particular combination of intelligence, observation, and practical imagination that had characterized her effectiveness as a teacher. As they worked together in the candle-lit study, she found herself thinking that this genuine engagement regarding matters of actual consequence might constitute the true foundation of their partnership, far more than the physical intimacy they had shared on their wedding night. The month following their arrival at Ravenswood developed its own rhythm and momentum. Vera had begun each day with systematic examination of household organization, consulting with Mrs. Hartwell regarding the current state of various rooms and systems, gradually developing a comprehensive understanding of what the estate required to function optimally. She had discovered that the library, a room of considerable magnitude containing several thousand volumes, had been neglected for years, its organization destroyed by time and insufficient care. She had enlisted the assistance of 3 younger servants and had begun the methodical process of cataloguing the collection, cleaning volumes, and reorganizing the shelves according to subject matter and size. This work, which might have seemed tedious or burdensome to many women, engaged Vera's mind completely. She moved through the library like an explorer, encountering new territory, occasionally discovering volumes of remarkable rarity and significance. She would set these aside for Lucas to examine, and they became occasions for discussion and intellectual engagement that extended late into evenings. Lucas, she observed, was gradually transforming in response to the renewed sense of purpose that engagement with his household and estate was creating. He had begun spending hours reviewing agricultural practices with his land steward. He had initiated conversations regarding the condition of tenant cottages and the welfare of those who worked his land. He had begun planning for the restoration of the gardens, consulting with Vera regarding what modifications might both improve aesthetic appeal and create more functional spaces. Most significantly, he had begun to smile with increasing frequency, a transformation that altered his entire face. The severity that had initially characterized his expression was gradually softening, replaced by something warmer and more genuine. On a particular autumn afternoon, approximately 3 weeks following their arrival, Lucas found Vera in the library, positioned on a ladder accessing the upper shelves of one section devoted to classical philosophy. He stood beneath her, observing with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of her appearance. The dusty work dress she had chosen for practical reasons, the escaped tendrils of hair that had come loose from her pinned arrangement, the fact that she was engaged in labor that could hardly be considered genteel. "You appear entirely comfortable in this environment," he observed. "I have been extraordinarily productive," she replied, gesturing to the sections she had already completed. "I have discovered several volumes of remarkable value. The collection, properly organized, will be quite extraordinary." "That is not precisely what I meant," Lucas said softly. "I meant that you appear comfortable engaging in genuinely meaningful work, content in the exercise of your capabilities, satisfied with the particular form of purpose this activity provides." Vera descended the ladder with deliberate care, and when she reached the ground level, she found herself positioned very close to him. He reached toward her face, brushing a strand of hair away with genuine tenderness. "You are remarkable," he said. "I have been thinking about this throughout the day, and I believe I should tell you. When I arranged this marriage, I was motivated by practical necessity and by Captain Blackwood's assessment that you possessed qualities I valued. However, I did not genuinely anticipate that you would transform this household and this estate as thoroughly as you have begun to do. I did not anticipate that I would find myself genuinely looking forward to the moments when we can discuss the day's developments or examine something that has captured your attention." Vera felt her heart respond to this declaration with a surge of emotion that surprised her with its intensity. She had not permitted herself to anticipate genuine affection developing between them. She had believed herself content with partnership and mutual respect. Yet Lucas's words suggested something that extended beyond those foundations toward something more personally significant. "I find myself similarly surprised," she admitted. "I accepted this marriage from conviction that it represented the most rational utilization of the circumstances available to me. Yet I have discovered that I am developing genuine regard for you as a person, not merely as the Duke or as the man who has provided me security, but as the particular individual you are." He reached for her hand, and they stood together in the library, surrounded by the ordered rows of books that had become the project through which their intellectual partnership was developing. "I wonder," he said slowly, "whether you would be willing to hear something I have been deliberating regarding for some time." Vera felt her stomach tighten with uncertainty. She did not know what declaration was coming, yet she sensed its significance. "There is something from my past," he continued, "something that I believe you should know, though I have been uncertain regarding how to introduce the information without it seeming either irrelevant or deceptive by virtue of its omission." "Then tell me now," Vera said, recognizing in his obvious difficulty that this was genuinely important to him. "When I was much younger, 4 years old, perhaps 5, my father employed a tutor for my education. The tutor was a remarkable man named Mr. James Ashford, an educator of considerable capability and genuine compassion. Mr. Ashford recognized that my father's approach to child-rearing was excessively severe, and he made deliberate efforts to provide me with intellectual stimulation and emotional support that I did not receive elsewhere." Lucas paused, and Vera found herself listening with the particular intensity that came from recognizing that something genuinely important was being disclosed. "Mr. Ashford," Lucas continued, "eventually married and had a daughter. That daughter eventually became an educator herself, a governess and instructor of considerable skill and genuine commitment to her students' intellectual development. She left an impression upon me that has persisted across years and multiple continents. I have thought of her frequently during my military service, have wondered what became of her, have hoped that her life has proceeded in ways that permitted the exercise of her considerable capabilities." Vera found that her entire body had gone rigid. She understood with absolute certainty what he was not yet explicitly stating. "I discovered recently where she had positioned herself professionally," Lucas continued. "I determined that I had opportunity to approach her, to acknowledge the significance she had possessed in my life, and potentially to offer her a future in which her capabilities would be more fully utilized than appeared possible in her current circumstances. I arranged our meeting with deliberate intent to discover whether she was the person I remembered, whether her character and intelligence matched the recollection that had sustained me through difficult experiences." He reached forward, taking both of her hands in his. "You are that person, Vera. You are the woman I remembered. You are the educator who recognized in a difficult young boy something worth developing, who offered him not mere instruction, but genuine regard. I have not told you this before, because I required clarity regarding whether revealing it would constitute an offering of genuine connection, or would merely make you feel manipulated. Now I am telling you because I believe you deserve to know the truth, that I came to you not merely from practical need, but from the recognition that you were a person of genuine significance to me, even across years of separation and transformation." Vera found that she could not speak. The revelation contained so many implications, answered so many small questions that had nagged at her regarding certain qualities in his regard toward her, explained certain aspects of his evident interest in her intellectual capabilities. "You knew me," she said finally, her voice emerging as whisper. "I remembered you," he corrected gently, "and I hoped that in meeting you again, I would discover that my memory had not deceived me regarding who you were." I have not been disappointed in that hope. The revelation of Lucas's past connection to her should have clarified everything. Instead, it generated considerable emotional turbulence that Vera had not anticipated. She found herself oscillating between gratitude that he had acted with such careful intention and something approaching betrayal that he had not disclosed this information immediately upon their engagement. She recognized intellectually that his reasoning had been sound. Had he revealed from the beginning that he had arranged their meeting based on previous memory of her, she might have perceived the entire arrangement as deception, as a man deliberately manipulating her knowledge of him in order to achieve his objective. Yet emotionally, she felt the weight of years that had existed between them, years in which she had been a person capable of impacting another individual's life, without any knowledge that such impact was occurring. She had not, in her role as educator, been consciously aware that the young Lucas Ashford, whom she had recognized as a child of unusual intelligence, trapped within circumstances that constrained his emotional expression, had regarded her with particular significance. She had simply been doing her work, attempting to provide the intellectual stimulation and emotional support that good teaching required. That this work had resonated across years and across the profound transformations that war had created seemed both remarkable and overwhelming. 10 days following the revelation, Vera found herself standing in the gardens during a period of afternoon light. She was ostensibly occupied with examining the landscape that the gardeners had begun under Lucas's direction to restore toward its previous condition. In actuality, she was engaged in private deliberation regarding emotions and revelations and the particular vulnerability of having been known and remembered by another person. She did not perceive Lucas's approach until he was quite near. He had developed the habit of moving with remarkable quietness, a residual effect, she suspected, of military years spent in circumstances where noise could prove fatal. "You are avoiding me," he observed without anger or accusation. "I am processing information," Vera replied, maintaining her position overlooking the partial gardens. "I have discovered that I have been known by someone across years and circumstances without any knowledge that such knowing was occurring. It is a curious sensation." "Uncomfortable?" he asked. "Clarifying," she replied after a moment of consideration. "You approached our marriage with deliberate intention and with knowledge of who I actually was. You were not merely accepting the proposal of an attractive woman to serve practical purposes. You were choosing someone you had already recognized as possessing value and significance." "Yes," he said simply. "That is either the most romantic thing I can imagine, or it is deception of a particularly sophisticated sort," Vera continued. "I am uncertain which assessment is actually appropriate." "It is neither," he replied. "It is neither romance nor deception. It is simply the truth that I encountered you at a formative time in my development, that I recognized in you qualities of genuine worth, that I have carried that memory across years, and that upon opportunity to encounter you again, I discovered that memory had not deceived me. The marriage arrangement was practical on both our sides, yet it was also something more, an opportunity to acknowledge connection that had always existed beneath the surface of conscious recognition." She turned to face him fully, and she perceived in his expression a quality of genuine vulnerability that he had not previously displayed. Despite the scars and the evident capability, despite the military discipline and the bearing of command, he was regarding her with the openness of someone who recognized that his future contentment was genuinely dependent upon her response to what he had disclosed. "I need to know something," Vera said. "Is your regard for me founded upon memory of the child I was to the young man you were, or is it founded upon the actual woman I have become?" "Both," he replied without hesitation. "I recognized in you the qualities that I remembered, the intelligence, the genuine care for intellectual development in those you taught, the capacity to see beyond immediate circumstance toward possibility. Yet I have also come to recognize the woman you are now, the woman who can examine an estate and perceive its latent potential, who can engage in genuine intellectual partnership, who can approach marriage not with resignation, but with deliberate intention to build something of value. The woman of now is both continuation and evolution of the woman I remembered." Vera found that tears had emerged, though she was uncertain whether they were tears of relief or fear, or simple, overwhelming response to the disclosure that she had been known and remembered and deliberately chosen by someone who had sufficient knowledge to make that choice with genuine comprehension. "I am frightened," she admitted. "I am frightened that this revelation will somehow contaminate what we have begun to build. I am frightened that you are more invested in memory than in actual present reality. I am frightened of the power you possess over my emotions and my security, and now I must recognize that you possess that power while having deliberately cultivated knowledge of who I am." Lucas reached toward her, and she permitted him to draw her close. She stood within the circle of his arms, her face pressed against his shoulder, her mind cycling through the multiple dimensions of this revelation. "I will tell you what I have learned," he said softly, his voice resonating through the space between them. "I have learned that fear and love are not opposing forces. I have learned that genuine vulnerability is not weakness, but rather the foundation upon which authentic connection can develop. I have learned that memory of what was, when combined with full recognition of what is, creates something new that is neither purely past nor purely present, but rather a genuine integration of both. He released her gradually, maintaining hold of her hands. I am terrified as well, Vera. I am terrified that I will not prove capable of being the partner you deserve. I am terrified that my residual damage from war will inevitably harm you despite my deliberate effort to prevent such harm. I am terrified that the memory that sustained me through difficult years was insufficient preparation for the actual complexity of building genuine partnership with you. In that moment, standing in the partially restored gardens of Ravenswood, holding the hands of a man who had both known her and not known her, who had both deceived and honored her, who was himself vulnerable and strong in paradoxical combination, Vera recognized that she was standing at a threshold. She could either permit this revelation to divide what they were building, or she could integrate it into a larger understanding of who they actually were to each other. "We will learn," she said finally. "We will learn this together. How to build something that honors memory without being imprisoned by it. How to recognize past significance without permitting it to diminish present possibility. We will learn, Lucas, whether we wish to or not." He drew her close once more, and for the first time since their marriage, she felt his embrace contain something beyond practical affection or marital obligation. It contained genuine need, the need of a man who had been fundamentally alone, who had carried memory of her across years and continents, and who was now confronted with the astounding reality that the woman he remembered was present beside him, willing to build something of genuine value together. November arrived with particular coldness, and Vera found herself increasingly occupied with the management of a household, preparing for the encroachment of winter. She had discovered, through weeks of careful observation and consultation with Mrs. Hartwell, that the estate required significant improvements to its heating systems, and that many of the rooms currently occupied by servants were inadequately protected from cold and damp. She had approached Lucas with a detailed proposal regarding modifications that would require moderate expense but would significantly improve conditions throughout the household. He had not merely approved the proposal, he had added his own observations regarding which improvements should be prioritized and had begun the process of engaging workers to undertake the necessary modifications. What Vera observed in these weeks following his revelation was a man gradually transforming from the haunted veteran she had initially encountered into something approaching contentment. He was still marked by war, still bore the visible scar, still occasionally retreated into silence that suggested difficult memories, still moved with the physical guardedness of someone whose body had learned that carelessness could prove fatal. Yet beneath these residual marks of his military service, a man was emerging who seemed to be reclaiming his capacity for genuine engagement with life. He spent considerable time in conversation with his land steward regarding agricultural improvements. He had begun planning modest house parties, despite his initial conviction that he was unsuited for social engagement. Most significantly, he had begun spending hours engaged in work with Vera, either in the library, where she continued her cataloging project, or in discussions regarding the ongoing restoration of the estate. On a particular evening in late November, as they sat together in the study reviewing accounts and making notes regarding winter preparations, Vera found herself observing him with the particular intensity of someone who has begun to understand another person in meaningful depth. "You are watching me with remarkable attention," Lucas observed, not glancing up from the papers before him. "Should I be concerned regarding the nature of this observation? I am attempting to reconcile my memory of you as a young man of unusual intelligence trapped within circumstances of considerable constraint," Vera replied, "with my observation of you as a man of 45 years who is gradually transforming into something approaching contentment. I am uncertain whether this transformation has been caused by our marriage, or whether it has been permitted by your return to Ravenswood, or whether it is simply the natural result of time and separation from the trauma of military service." Lucas set down his pen and turned to face her more fully. "I believe it is all of those things in combination. Return to Ravenswood granted me physical distance from the circumstances that created the trauma. Time has permitted processing of experience and integration of what cannot be changed, yet I believe our marriage, your presence, your intelligence, your genuine engagement with building something of value, has catalyzed transformation that might not have occurred through mere time and distance." He stood and moved toward where she sat, taking her hands and drawing her to standing position. "I have been thinking extensively regarding something, and I believe I should say it aloud, rather than permitting it to remain internal deliberation." Vera found her heart accelerating in response to the evident significance of whatever disclosure was approaching. She had learned in recent weeks that Lucas's deliberate manner of speaking typically preceded statements of genuine consequence. "I have come to recognize," he said slowly, "that what began as practical arrangement has transformed into something approaching genuine love. I am uncertain whether you have experienced similar transformation, and I will not require that you claim feelings you do not possess. However, I believe you deserve to know the nature of my own emotional development." Vera found that she was capable of breathing, barely. "What has caused this transformation?" "Observation of you engaged in work that is genuinely meaningful to you," he replied. "Recognition of your intelligence applied toward genuine problem-solving regarding the management of this household and estate. Understanding of your capacity for genuine regard toward people, toward Mrs. Hartwell and the other servants, toward your students during your previous employment, toward this place that you have chosen to treat as something worth improving, despite its not being your birthright or responsibility. Understanding that you have approached our marriage not with resignation or mere accommodation, but with deliberate intention to build something of value." He paused, his pale grey-blue eyes holding her with the particular intensity that had come to characterize his regard toward her in recent weeks. "I have also come to recognize that physical intimacy between us has transformed from practical obligation into something genuinely pleasurable for both parties, that your presence in this house has transformed it from a residence of obligation and memory into an actual home, that you have become someone whose company I actively seek, whose thoughts I value, whose presence I find genuinely comforting." "You are describing love," Vera said quietly. "I am," he confirmed. "I am describing what I believe constitutes genuine love, not merely romantic sentiment, but rather the combination of intellectual regard, physical attraction, emotional security, and deliberate commitment to another person's welfare that permits genuine partnership to develop." Vera found herself reaching toward his face, her fingers tracing the line of the scar that had come to seem less a disfigurement and more simply a part of who he was. "I have experienced something similar," she admitted. "When I came to you from my position as governess, I was motivated entirely by practical consideration. I was uncertain whether I could develop genuine regard for someone I had married from necessity rather than choice. Yet you have demonstrated such consistent respect for me as a person, such genuine interest in my thoughts and capabilities, such care regarding my comfort and welfare, that my original uncertainty has transformed." She paused, gathering courage for a confession that seemed simultaneously obvious and terrifying. "I believe I love you, Lucas. I am uncertain whether what I experience constitutes the kind of love that literary heroines describe in rapturous terms. However, I love you in the particular way that comes from knowing someone thoroughly, from recognizing their flaws and damage, and still choosing to build something of value with them. I love you because you have demonstrated that you love me." When he kissed her, it was not the tentative gesture of their wedding night, nor the controlled passion of subsequent encounters. It contained the particular quality of declaration, the physical expression of something that words had begun, but that required this embodied communication to fully manifest. As November progressed toward December, Vera found herself thinking of how remarkable it was that she had arrived at Ravenswood as a woman of practical necessity and was gradually becoming a woman whose existence was grounded in genuine partnership and authentic affection. She had not anticipated love. She had merely accepted what seemed to be the most sensible alternative available to her. Yet love had emerged nonetheless, not in the dramatic, sudden manner of romantic fiction, but rather in the gradual, genuine manner of two people building something of actual value, through deliberate commitment and honest engagement with each other's full humanity. She had been given to a war veteran, and she had discovered that she had been given something infinitely more valuable, a partner capable of genuine transformation, a man who had chosen her with full knowledge of who she actually was, and the possibility of building a life of authentic meaning and genuine affection. December arrived with the particular intensity of Christmas preparations at a country estate. Vera had discovered, to her considerable surprise, that the management of Ravenswood during the holiday season required coordination of efforts extending far beyond the immediate household. The estate traditionally hosted a substantial gathering of family and significant acquaintances during the Christmas season, a practice that had been abandoned during Lucas's years of military service. The revival of this tradition required considerable effort. Vera had begun immediately upon learning of the expectation, consulting with Mrs. Hartwell regarding previous year's arrangements, assessing the readiness of guest chambers, coordinating with the kitchens regarding provisions and menu planning. She had approached the task with the same systematic attention to detail that had characterized her approach to the library cataloging project. Lucas had observed her efforts with evident appreciation, though she had also perceived in him a quality of anxiety regarding the gathering that approached. When she had questioned this anxiety directly, he had admitted that his relationship with his younger brother, Viscount Edward, had never been entirely comfortable, and that his marriage, particularly given the unconventional manner of its arrangement, would likely generate comment and skepticism. The announcement of the arrival of Lady Margaret Ashford, the Dowager Duchess, came on an afternoon of unexpected mild weather. Vera, positioned in the morning room reviewing accounts with Mrs. Hartwell, received word that the Dowager's carriage had been sighted approaching the estate. She rose immediately, experiencing the particular nervousness that accompanied the prospect of meeting one's mother-in-law under circumstances where considerable judgment might be exercised. Yet when Lady Margaret emerged from the carriage, a woman of approximately 60 years with silver-white hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding respect, her expression suggested warmth rather than criticism. She embraced Lucas with genuine affection, then turned her attention toward Vera with evident interest. "So you are the woman who has captured my son's attention sufficiently that he has consented to marry after years of apparent commitment to solitude," Lady Margaret observed, studying Vera with the penetrating gaze that had been inherited by both her sons. "I am delighted to meet you. I have received reports from Captain Blackwood suggesting that you are a woman of considerable capability and genuine character. I am pleased to discover that such reports appear to be accurate." "Your Grace," Vera replied, making the appropriate curtsy, "I am honored to be welcomed into the family. I trust you will find Ravenswood adequately prepared for your comfort." "I am certain it will be exceptional," Lady Margaret replied, taking Vera's arm in a gesture of surprising familiarity. "I have heard extraordinary reports regarding the improvements that have been undertaken. Let me see what my daughter-in-law has accomplished." The tour of the estate, undertaken by Vera, Lucas and Lady Margaret, proceeded through the morning hours. The Dowager Duchess asked detailed questions regarding every modification, examined the catalogued library with genuine appreciation, and expressed satisfaction with the overall direction of Vera's management of the household. "You have done remarkably well," Lady Margaret said finally, settling herself in the drawing room with tea. "Ravenswood has been in considerable disorder since my husband's death. Lucas has been in no position to address the disorder, given his military service and the residual effects of his experiences during that service. You have approached the task with evident intelligence and genuine care. This place is being restored not merely to its previous condition, but towards something improved." The arrival of Viscount Edward proved considerably more complicated. He descended from his own carriage late in the afternoon, displaying all the characteristics that Lucas had subtly warned Vera to anticipate: superficial charm, obvious physical attractiveness, and the bearing of someone accustomed to receiving admiration without earning it. He greeted his mother with warmth, embraced his brother with what appeared to be genuine affection, and turned his attention toward Vera with the particular assessment of a man evaluating a woman's aesthetic qualities. "So this is the mysterious governess who has captured the Duke's interest," Edward said, taking Vera's hand with deliberate lingering. "I must say, brother, your taste is considerably more refined than I might have anticipated, given your limited experience with matrimony." Vera extracted her hand with careful courtesy. "The Viscount is kind to offer such observation. I trust your journey was comfortable." "Tolerable," Edward replied, settling himself in a chair without waiting for invitation. "Though I confess I am curious regarding the particular circumstances that led you to accept marriage to my brother. Surely you recognize that he is not precisely an ideal marriage prospect, a man of considerable age, bearing evident scars from military service, demonstrating little of the social capability that renders matrimony genuinely pleasant." "Edward," Lady Margaret intervened, with the particular sharpness of a mother addressing a child who has overstepped bounds, "your observations are neither welcome nor appropriate. I suggest you correct your manner toward your sister-in-law immediately." Lucas had not spoken, though Vera observed that his entire posture had shifted toward the particular readiness of someone prepared for confrontation. She placed her hand upon his arm, communicating through the gesture her desire that he permit her to address Edward's impertinence. The Viscount's observations reflect a particular view regarding matrimony as exchange of aesthetic appreciation rather than genuine partnership, Vera said, her voice carrying the particular firmness that came from her training in managing difficult students. I accepted marriage to the Duke because I recognized in him qualities of integrity, intelligence, and genuine character that I value considerably more than superficial charm or ease of social engagement. Should the Viscount wish to understand my reasoning more thoroughly, I would suggest that he examine his own assumptions regarding what constitutes a desirable marriage arrangement. She turned her attention back to Lady Margaret, effectively dismissing Viscount Edward from the conversation. I have arranged that dinner will be served at 7 o'clock this evening. I hope this timing permits adequate opportunity for rest following your travels. The evening proceeded with careful civility. Dinner was served in the grand dining room, restored to respectability through weeks of attention from Vera and the household staff. The table displayed the particular elegance that came from good china, carefully arranged flowers, and service that demonstrated both professionalism and care. Viscount Edward remained largely silent during the meal, though Vera observed that he watched both Lucas and herself with evident calculation. She recognized in him the particular quality of someone whose position was dependent upon another's continued goodwill, and who therefore possessed motivation to create discord in relationships that might affect his circumstances. After dinner, as Vera excused herself to permit the men to engage in whatever conversation they wished, Lady Margaret detained her privately. "I apologize for my son's behavior," the Dowager Duchess said. "Edward has never managed particularly well the reality that his older brother possesses position and authority that he himself will never obtain. Your marriage appears to have intensified his anxiety regarding his own circumstances and significance. I will not permit such anxiety to disrupt the household or my marriage," Vera replied calmly, "though I will acknowledge that it complicates the gathering unnecessarily." "You are a remarkable woman," Lady Margaret observed, studying Vera with evident approval. "My son has made an exceptionally wise choice. Whatever the original circumstances of your marriage may have been, I suspect that Edward will eventually recognize this as well, though it may require considerable time and education on his part." That night, as Lucas entered her chambers and drew her close, Vera found herself reflecting on the manner in which her position had shifted. She was no longer the vulnerable governess accepting marriage from necessity. She was the Duchess of Ravenswood, established in her role through genuine capability and demonstrated character. She was a woman who could face impertinence from a Viscount and respond with appropriate firmness. She was recognized and valued by Lucas's mother as a person of worth and capability. "You handled Edward with remarkable grace," Lucas said, his voice carrying warmth and evident pride. "You did not permit his impertinence to diminish you or to generate unnecessary conflict." "He is a person of limited emotional development," Vera replied. "Responding to his provocations with anger would merely confirm his perception that he possessed power to disturb me. Instead, I demonstrated through calm firmness that his opinions regarding my marriage are irrelevant to the reality of what I have built here." As December progressed and the household filled gradually with additional guests, Vera found herself increasingly confident in her position and her capabilities. The Christmas gathering became an opportunity to demonstrate not merely her competence in household management, but her capacity to participate meaningfully in society as the Duchess, rather than as a woman dependent upon the Duke's position for her significance. January arrived with the particular clarity that followed the intensity of holiday gatherings. The estate had returned to its more customary quietness, with only Lady Margaret remaining as a houseguest, engaged in various activities, but causing minimal disruption to the established rhythms of Vera's management. It was on a morning of considerable cold, as Vera stood in the breakfast room consuming tea and reviewing the week's household accounts, that her body communicated something that her mind had not yet fully processed. The particular nausea that accompanied movement, the unexpected fatigue despite adequate sleep, the subtle shift in her body's responses that suggested something fundamental was altering. These signs accumulated gradually before Vera recognized them for what they represented. She had become pregnant. The revelation produced simultaneous emotions of profound joy and unexpected anxiety. She had known that pregnancy was likely to occur following marriage, had accepted that bearing children would be among her responsibilities as Duchess. Yet the actual reality of carrying a child, the physical transformation that would be required, the vulnerability of pregnancy and birth, the profound change that a child would bring to the household and to her own body, generated considerable apprehension alongside the genuine pleasure. She determined to tell Lucas immediately, before fear or hesitation could contaminate the disclosure. She found him in the study, engaged in correspondence with his land steward regarding spring planting and crop management. He looked up from his work as she entered, his expression shifting toward particular attention as he perceived something in her demeanor. "You bear news," he said, setting down his pen. "Your countenance suggests that it is significant news." "I believe I am pregnant," Vera said simply, deciding that directness was most appropriate given the circumstances. "The signs are not yet entirely definitive, but I am confident regarding my assessment." She observed his expression undergo transformation, from initial surprise toward something approaching wonder. He rose from his chair and moved toward her, his hands reaching to take hers. "You are certain?" he asked. "As certain as a woman can be without medical confirmation," Vera replied. "I thought it appropriate that you should know." He drew her close, his embrace containing the particular quality of gentleness that had come to characterize his physical affection toward her. "This is extraordinary," he said softly. "We have been married for merely 3 months, and already we are to become parents. This is remarkable." "I am anxious," Vera admitted, permitting herself vulnerability in a way that she had come to recognize as safe with Lucas. "I am uncertain regarding my capacity to manage both the demands of household management and the demands of pregnancy and subsequent motherhood. I am uncertain regarding the physical experience of carrying a child and the risks associated with childbirth." "Those anxieties are entirely appropriate and understandable," Lucas replied, moving slightly to regard her face while maintaining his hold upon her hands. "However, I will tell you that I am confident regarding your capabilities. You have managed considerably more complex situations than the combination of pregnancy and household management, and regarding the physical risks, I will ensure that you receive the finest medical care available, that you are protected from excessive demands, and that your welfare remains my primary concern throughout." Over the subsequent weeks, as Vera's pregnancy became increasingly evident, she discovered that the household responded to the news with genuine celebration. Lady Margaret expressed delight regarding the prospect of a grandchild. Mrs. Hartwell undertook modifications to Vera's daily responsibilities to ensure that she was not required to engage in physical labor that might prove harmful. Even Viscount Edward, upon learning the news during a subsequent visit, demonstrated enough propriety to offer congratulations without accompanying impertinence. Yet Vera also discovered that pregnancy brought unexpected complications to her carefully established routines. The nausea that had initially been manageable intensified during the middle months. She experienced unexpected fatigue that required her to adjust her daily activities. Her body began to transform in ways that rendered her previous clothing uncomfortable and required substantial modifications to her wardrobe. Most significantly, she became increasingly aware of the power that Lucas possessed over her through her physical vulnerability. She found herself dependent upon his assistance for tasks that she had previously managed independently. She required his support in navigating the particular anxieties that accompanied pregnancy, the fears regarding whether the child would be healthy, the concerns regarding her own capacity to survive childbirth, the uncertainty regarding whether she would prove adequate as a mother. Yet rather than utilizing this vulnerability as tool for control, Lucas demonstrated a quality of consistent care and genuine concern that deepened Vera's recognition of his fundamental character. He accompanied her on walks that were necessary for her physical and emotional health. He adjusted household schedules to accommodate her changing energy levels. He engaged with her fears regarding pregnancy and childbirth with the seriousness they deserved, consulting with physicians and researching what measures might be undertaken to ensure her safety. He also continued to engage with her intellectually, understanding that intellectual stimulation remained as important to her during pregnancy as it had been before. He would sit beside her in the library, where she had shifted her activities to accommodate her reduced physical capability, and they would discuss texts or correspondence or household matters with the same genuine engagement that had characterized their relationship since its beginning. "I am becoming increasingly substantial," Vera observed one afternoon in April, regarding her reflection with something approaching resignation. "I barely recognize my own body. My previous clothing no longer functions. I find myself moving with far less grace than is appropriate for a duchess." "You are magnificent," Lucas replied, and she perceived from the directness of his statement that he genuinely believed what he was expressing. "You are carrying our child. You are undergoing the particular transformation that permits the creation of new life. This is not something to be concealed or regarded with shame. This is something to be recognized as extraordinary." He moved to stand beside her at the window, his hand resting upon her swollen belly in a gesture that had become habitual. The child moved beneath his hand, responding to his touch with the particular responsiveness that seemed to demonstrate awareness even before independent existence. "This child," he continued softly, "will be the embodiment of what we have built together. It will carry forward not merely our family name, but the genuine partnership that we have created, the recognition that authentic connection between two people can develop even in circumstances that begin from practical necessity. That is a legacy of genuine significance." Spring transformed Ravenswood in ways that paralleled Vera's own transformation. The gardens, which had been neglected for years and had been gradually restored through Lucas and Vera's collaborative efforts, began to display the results of months of careful work. Flowering plants emerged from carefully prepared soil. The geometric patterns of the formal gardens began to resolve into shapes recognizable from the original design. The space that had been merely potential began to manifest as actual achievement. Vera, despite her increasing physical limitations, had involved herself in the garden's development with the particular attention she brought to all projects under her purview. She had consulted with the head gardener regarding plantings appropriate to both aesthetic and practical purposes. She had advocated for the creation of spaces that would be functional for household use, areas for cutting flowers, spaces for growing herbs required by the kitchens, while maintaining the formal beauty that constituted the estate's heritage. Most significantly, she had begun to establish herself within the broader community surrounding Ravenswood. The village that relied upon the Duke's position and the estate's prosperity had experienced years of limited engagement from Lucas during his military service. Vera had begun the deliberate process of re-establishing the connection between household and community through visits to the village, consultation regarding welfare of tenants, and participation in the maintenance of traditions that had characterized the Duke's relationship with those dependent upon his patronage. She had visited the school that served the village's children and had found it vastly inadequate. A single room, a single instructor with minimal training, materials that were barely functional. She had brought this situation to Lucas's attention, and he had responded with the particular readiness to act that had come to characterize their partnership. "Establish what is required," he had instructed. "Consult with the village leadership and the current instructor. Determine what improvements are necessary and implement them. The education of children whose futures depend upon the estate's welfare is a responsibility that I have neglected for years." Vera had undertaken the project with her characteristic systematic approach. She had discovered through consultation that the school required not merely material improvements, but genuine pedagogical development. The current instructor, a woman of advanced age with minimal training, was doing the best she could with inadequate resources, but lacked the knowledge of educational methodology necessary to provide students with genuine capability. Vera had proposed something radical, that she undertake the instruction of advanced students, those approaching the age when they would enter apprenticeships or would assume greater household responsibilities. She would provide them with instruction in reading, calculation, practical literacy, and the fundamental knowledge necessary for them to manage their own affairs effectively. Lucas had agreed to the proposal without reservation, had allocated funds for the development of the schoolroom, and had supported Vera's efforts with the particular advocacy that suggested he regarded her work as significantly important. "You are establishing a legacy," he had observed, watching her prepare materials for her first week of instruction with the village children. "You are providing opportunity to children who would otherwise have minimal chance of developing their full capabilities. This is exactly the kind of purpose that should characterize the position of Duchess." By April, Vera had become increasingly established in her role not merely as Lucas's wife, but as a woman of genuine significance within the community. The tenants who had previously regarded the Duke's household with the formality of dependence upon someone remote and disconnected had begun to regard both Lucas and Vera as people who were genuinely invested in their welfare. The relationship between estate and community had shifted from hierarchical obligation toward something approaching partnership. Lady Margaret, observing these developments during one of her frequent visits, had expressed clear pride in her daughter-in-law's accomplishments. "You have done something remarkable," the Dowager Duchess had told Vera directly. "You have not merely managed the household, you have established yourself as a genuine duchess, a woman of position and influence, whose authority derives not merely from marriage, but from demonstrated capability and genuine commitment to the welfare of those whom you serve. My husband never managed this integration. My son would not have managed it without your influence." The anxiety that Vera experienced regarding her approaching confinement was mitigated somewhat by the recognition that she had established meaningful purpose and genuine influence within her sphere. Should something occur during childbirth, and she was sufficiently realistic to recognize that such outcomes, while uncommon, were certainly possible, she would have established a legacy of actual significance. She would have demonstrated that women were capable of more than merely being wives and mothers. They were capable of intellectual contribution, practical management, and genuine influence upon the welfare of entire communities. In May, Lucas had proposed something unexpected, that they undertake a visit to London, displaying Vera to society during the season as the newly established Duchess of Ravenswood. Vera had initially resisted, regarding her increasingly substantial pregnancy as inappropriate for social display. "You are the Duchess," Lucas had said simply. "Your position does not depend upon whether you are demonstrating an appropriately slender figure. You will present yourself to society as a woman of position and authority. The fact that you carry our child is not something to be concealed. It is something to be recognized as evidence of our establishment as a legitimate partnership." The journey to London in late May, though physically challenging given her pregnancy, had proceeded with the particular logistics that Lucas had arranged to ensure her comfort. They had stayed in the Ravenswood townhouse on Mount Street, the same residence where they had met and where Vera had first encountered Lucas beyond the carefully controlled circumstances of that initial meeting. Society's response to Vera's presentation as the pregnant Duchess had been remarkably positive. Rather than regarding her condition as something inappropriate for public display, society had seemed to regard it as evidence of her legitimate position and of the establishment of the Ravenswood succession. Ladies of status had called upon her. Invitations to teas and modest gatherings had arrived regularly. She had been perceived gradually, not as a woman of questionable origins who had married the Duke through mysterious circumstances, but as the Duchess, a woman of evident capability and position. Most significantly, Edward's wife, the Viscountess, had approached Vera privately and acknowledged what had become increasingly evident, that through her marriage to Lucas, Vera had secured a position of influence within the family structure that Edward himself was unlikely ever to achieve. The Viscountess had treated Vera with considerably greater respect following this realization. By late May, when Lucas had insisted that they return to Ravenswood to prepare for the imminent birth, Vera found herself reflecting on how completely her position had transformed in the months since her marriage. She had arrived at Ravenswood as a woman of practical necessity, uncertain regarding her capabilities and her future. She was returning as a woman of established significance, recognized as capable and worthy of respect, carrying a child who would inherit not merely title and estates, but would embody the genuine partnership that she and Lucas had built together. June arrived with the particular heaviness that characterized late pregnancy. Vera found herself moving with considerably less grace than she regarded as appropriate for a duchess, her belly substantial enough that she could no longer see her own feet without deliberate effort. The physical discomfort increased week by week, the aching in her lower back, the swelling of her ankles despite careful elevation, the particular exhaustion that came not from intellectual or physical labor, but from simply carrying the weight of the child within her. She had consulted with the physician, a man of considerable competence and genuine care for his patients, who had provided reassurance regarding her health and the apparent health of the child. The pregnancy, he had assessed, was proceeding normally. The child appeared positioned appropriately for birth. There were no apparent complications that would suggest difficulty during the actual delivery, yet Vera remained anxious. She had observed throughout her life the manner in which childbirth remained one of the few circumstances in which women faced genuine risk of death. She was aware that even optimal circumstances could produce unexpected complications. She was aware that physicians, despite their genuine competence and careful attention, possessed limited capability to address complications should they emerge during the actual labor and delivery. She had attempted to conceal these anxieties from Lucas, recognizing that his own concerns regarding her welfare were already substantial. Yet he had perceived her anxiety with the particular perceptiveness that had come to characterize his attention to her internal states. "You are afraid," he had observed one afternoon in mid-June, finding her positioned in the conservatory, ostensibly occupied with reading but actually engaged in anxious contemplation. "Childbirth carries genuine risks," Vera had replied, deciding that honesty was more appropriate than attempting to conceal her fears. "I am sufficiently realistic to recognize that complications can occur despite optimal circumstances and the best medical care. I am sufficiently intelligent to understand that death in childbirth remains a genuine possibility for women in my situation." "Yes," Lucas had acknowledged, settling himself beside her despite the awkwardness that her pregnancy created for such proximity. "Those risks exist. However, I will tell you something that I have determined through my own research and through consultation with the best physicians I could locate. Your health is excellent. Your pregnancy has proceeded without complications. The child appears to be appropriately positioned. All indicators suggest that you will deliver successfully and that both you and the child will survive and thrive following the birth." "You cannot guarantee that," Vera had replied. "No," he had admitted, "I cannot. However, I can tell you with absolute certainty that should anything occur to you during this process, it would not be because of insufficient care or attention. I will ensure that you receive every possible protection and support that medical science can provide. I will remain present throughout the process, and I will commit to you that should you survive, which I genuinely believe you will, I will ensure that our child is raised with the understanding of how much their existence cost their mother in physical transformation and risk." The conversation had provided some small comfort, though it had not eliminated her anxiety entirely. She found herself engaging increasingly in intellectual work, in the library, in review of household accounts, in planning for the household's management during the period when she would be confined following the birth. She had also engaged in physical preparation, walking as much as her increasing heaviness permitted, engaging in the particular forms of gentle activity that were regarded as appropriate for pregnant women. She had consulted with the midwife who would assist in the actual delivery, a woman of considerable experience and genuine competence. She had prepared the nursery with Lucas's assistance, establishing spaces appropriate for the care of a newborn. By late June, she was finding it difficult to engage in many of her previous activities. She could no longer occupy herself for extended periods in the library, as the physical positions required for cataloguing and organizing the collections caused considerable discomfort. She had delegated the majority of household management to Mrs. Hartwell, though she maintained general oversight and continued to be consulted regarding significant decisions. She had also begun receiving visits from Lady Margaret, who had established herself in residence at Ravenswood in early June, both to provide support and to ensure that her grandchild would have appropriate welcoming into the world. The Dowager Duchess had brought with her considerable experience regarding childbirth, having borne 3 children successfully despite the medical understanding available during her own childbearing years. "I will not claim that it is pleasant," Lady Margaret had told her frankly, in response to Vera's request for honest information regarding what she should expect. "However, I will tell you that it is survivable, that the intensity of the experience is temporary, and that the production of a healthy child is sufficient reward for whatever discomfort is required. Additionally, you possess advantages that I did not: superior medical knowledge, better trained attendants, and a husband who is genuinely committed to your welfare. These things matter considerably." As June progressed toward July, Vera found herself in the particular state of late pregnancy, where all previous comfort seems to disappear, and all one's focus contracts toward the anticipation of labor and delivery. She could not sleep comfortably. She could not occupy herself intellectually for extended periods. She could only wait and prepare and attempt to manage her anxiety regarding the approaching transformation. Yet within this physical discomfort and emotional anxiety, she found herself thinking of Lucas with a quality of gratitude that seemed disproportionate to the circumstances. He had arranged for her physical comfort with meticulous attention. He had ensured that she had access to the best medical care available. He had modified household routines to accommodate her limitations, Most significantly, he had continued to demonstrate genuine care and affection despite the transformations that pregnancy had created in her appearance and her capabilities. She had once accepted his proposal from purely practical necessity. She was now experiencing the reality that genuine partnership could emerge from even the most unpromising circumstances, and that partnership could include authentic care for another person's welfare, regardless of that person's temporary limitations or vulnerability. As July began, she was ready. Not comfortable, but ready. Her time of confinement was approaching. Her transformation into motherhood was imminent. And she faced that transformation secure in the knowledge that she would not face it alone, that the man she had married had proven himself to be someone worthy of the trust she had gradually begun to extend to him. The first indication of labor began in the early morning hours of July 15th. Vera had been sleeping fitfully, as had become her custom in late pregnancy, when she became aware of a sensation that was distinct from the usual discomfort of her condition. The sensation was rhythmic, originating in her lower abdomen, accompanied by a tightening that seemed to originate from deep within her body. She lay in the darkness, attempting to determine whether what she was experiencing constituted the genuine onset of labor or merely another false warning that she had experienced multiple times in recent weeks. The sensation continued, building in intensity, then subsiding, then building again in a pattern that seemed to suggest something more significant than previous manifestations. She rose from bed with considerable difficulty, given the awkwardness of her enlarged belly, and made her way to the bell pull. She rang for the chambermaid who had been assigned to night duty, requesting that the physician be summoned and that Lucas be informed. Lucas arrived in her chambers within minutes, his clothing hastily assembled, his expression conveying the particular alarm of someone confronted with imminent circumstances that he had been intellectually anticipating but was not emotionally prepared to experience. He approached her with the careful concern that had become his habitual response to any suggestion that she was experiencing discomfort. "The physician?" he asked. "Has been summoned," Vera replied, gripping the bedpost as another contraction built. "I believe the process is beginning, though I am uncertain regarding precise timeline or duration." "We have prepared for this," Lucas said, though whether he was speaking to her or to himself was unclear. "The physician will arrive, we will manage. Everything has been arranged appropriately." The physician arrived within 30 minutes, confirming through examination that Vera was indeed in early labor. He established himself in the adjoining room, making himself available for consultation, while permitting Vera the early stages of labor to progress in relative privacy. Lady Margaret had been summoned from her chambers and had taken up position in the room, providing both physical support and the particular reassurance that came from knowledge and experience. The labor progressed throughout the day and into the evening. Vera found that the intellectual understanding she possessed regarding the process proved inadequate to the actual experience. The contractions built in intensity, seeming to demand a quality of surrender that her body required even as her mind attempted to maintain control and understanding. Lucas remained present, a steady presence that did not attempt to manage the experience, but rather provided consistent support. He held her hand through contractions. He ensured that she maintained hydration and consumed small quantities of broth when she was capable of doing so. He spoke to her with quiet encouragement, acknowledging the difficulty of what she was enduring, while also communicating absolute conviction that she would succeed. "You are remarkable," he said during a period between contractions. "You are managing this with the same intelligence and determination that you bring to every other challenge you face. You will do this, Vera. You will give birth to our child, and you will survive, and we will emerge from this experience as a family." By the time midnight approached on July 15th, Vera felt as though she had transcended the boundaries of her own body. She existed in a space of pure physical sensation and effort. Her entire being contracted toward the single purpose of expelling the child within her. She was aware dimly of voices, the physician providing instructions, Lady Margaret offering encouragement, Lucas speaking to her with quiet steadiness. And then, in a moment that seemed to represent the culmination of all the physical effort and pain and effort that had preceded it, something shifted. The sensation transformed from simple pressure and pain towards something that contained an element of relief. A final push, a sensation of something releasing, and suddenly the physician was lifting a small, wet form away from her body. The child cried, a sound that seemed to embody both complaint and triumph. The physician was handling the infant with practiced care, cleaning away fluid and blood. examining with professional thoroughness before finally wrapping the child in carefully prepared linens. "Her daughter," the physician announced, his expression registering satisfaction with the successful completion of the delivery. "Healthy, appears entirely normal in development. Excellent lung capacity based on vigor of her crying." Lady Margaret made a sound that combined relief and joy, while Lucas's hand, which had never released Vera's throughout the labor, squeezed gently. The physician had mentioned that the placental delivery remained necessary, a process that Vera was too exhausted to fully comprehend. She was aware of additional contractions, considerably less intense than those that had preceded the child's birth, and then the sense of completion of the process being finally concluded. The child was brought to her, a small form wrapped in white linen, her face barely visible, her eyes closed. Vera regarded her daughter with an emotion that seemed to exceed language, the particular combination of exhaustion, relief, overwhelming love, and the profound recognition that her life had been fundamentally transformed in a manner that she could never reverse. "She is perfect," Lucas said softly, his own voice carrying the weight of profound emotion. "She is perfect, and you are alive, and we are now a family of 3. Vera closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. She had survived childbirth. She had produced a healthy daughter. She had managed the transformation that every woman of her era faced with considerable risk and uncertainty, and she had survived it, and the child was healthy, and they would move forward together as family. "We will require a name," Lady Margaret observed, settling herself in the chair beside the bed. "What shall we call this child?" Lucas looked to Vera, recognizing that the naming of the child should be her privilege. Vera regarded her daughter carefully before responding, the name that had resided in her mind throughout pregnancy, finally finding its voice. "Caroline," she said softly. "We shall call her Caroline Elizabeth Ashford. Caroline for no particular ancestor, but simply because it is a name that seems to suit her. Elizabeth a second name, honoring the strength that the act of giving birth has demonstrated within myself, and that I hope she will develop as she grows." The days immediately following Caroline's birth existed in a suspended space that seemed to operate according to different temporal laws than ordinary existence. Vera was aware of time passing, dawn arriving, midnight descending, meals being served, yet the progression felt dreamlike and disconnected from her normal comprehension of duration and sequence. Her body, having undergone the extraordinary transformation of pregnancy and the profound exertion of childbirth, communicated its damage through a vocabulary of pain and weakness that she had not anticipated, despite reasonable intellectual preparation. The physician had warned her that recovery would require weeks, that she would experience soreness, extending far beyond the immediate location of the birth, that her body would require substantial time to restore itself to functional capacity. What he had not adequately conveyed was the particular quality of vulnerability that accompanied this physical recovery. She, who had managed households and established herself as woman of capability and authority, found herself incapable of rising from bed without assistance. She, who prided herself on intellectual engagement and practical problem-solving, found her mind operating in a fog that made even simple concentration difficult. Most profoundly, she discovered that her emotional responses had undergone transformation as dramatic as her physical condition. She wept without warning, not from sadness precisely, but from the overwhelming intensity of the combination of exhaustion, pain, and the profound love that she was experiencing toward the small human being that she had produced. Lucas did not leave her chambers during the first 3 days following Caroline's birth. He remained present through the long nights when Vera was required to nurse the child, when pain prevented comfortable sleep, when her body's processes required attention and management. He assisted with the physical necessities of recovery that decency prevented other attendants from managing. He spoke to her with quiet encouragement, reminding her repeatedly that the intensity of the pain and weakness was temporary, that her body would gradually restore itself, that thousands of women had endured this same experience and had recovered. "I am diminished," Vera said on the 3rd day following the birth, regarding her reflection in the looking-glass with something approaching despair. Her body was no longer pregnant, yet it was not restored to its previous condition. Her belly, though substantially reduced from its pre-birth state, remained distended. Her breasts, enlarged and tender from nursing, seemed disproportionate to her overall frame. Her face was marked by exhaustion. Her hair was limp despite attempts at grooming. and her complexion seemed to have acquired the particular pallor of someone who had endured profound physical trauma. "You have given birth to our child," Lucas replied from where he stood beside her. "You have undergone one of the most profound physical experiences available to human existence. That you are not immediately restored to your previous condition is not diminishment. It is evidence of what you have accomplished." He reached toward her face, his fingers gentle as they traced the line of her cheekbone. "You are more beautiful to me now than you have ever been. You are a woman who has survived childbirth, who is nursing our child, who is gradually reclaiming her strength. That is not diminishment. That is profound capability." The recovery progressed with the particular slowness of genuine healing. By the end of the second week, Vera was capable of sitting upright for extended periods without excessive discomfort. By the third week, she was able to move about her chambers without assistance, though the physical effort required was considerably greater than she anticipated. By the fourth week, she was beginning to venture into the hallways and adjacent chambers, each expedition requiring careful management of her still limited energy. Throughout this recovery, Caroline remained the center of the household's attention. The infant's particular needs, feeding approximately every 3 hours, the inevitable complications of learning to nurse, the periodic distress that characterized normal infant development, structured the household's rhythms far more completely than any schedule that Vera had previously established. Vera discovered that nursing her daughter created a particular intimacy that transcended the intellectual or even the physical affection she had developed toward Lucas. The child, who was entirely dependent upon her, who required her physical presence for survival, seemed to anchor Vera to a profound sense of purpose that extended beyond household management or intellectual engagement. This was her daughter, this human being, entirely separate from herself yet entirely dependent upon her, represented the ultimate extension of her existence and her commitment. Yet, she also discovered that motherhood created unexpected complications to her sense of identity. She had approached motherhood intellectually, understood that it was a role she would undertake as part of her responsibilities as wife and duchess. She had not anticipated the manner in which love for this child would reorganize her priorities and her sense of what constituted meaningful work. She had been accustomed to measuring her value through intellectual accomplishment, through management of complex household systems, through the establishment of community programs, and the restoration of Ravenswood's prominence. Now she found herself measuring value equally through the capacity to soothe her daughter's distress, to provide nourishment, to witness the child's gradual emergence as a person with particular preferences and personality. By the middle of August, as Vera's physical recovery was progressing sufficiently that she could spend extended periods in Caroline's nursery without excessive pain, she found herself confronting the question of how to reintegrate her maternal role with the other responsibilities that constituted her position as Duchess. "You are concerned about household management," Lucas observed, finding her one afternoon engaged in reviewing accounts from the nursery chair while Caroline slept beside her. "You are wondering whether you can maintain your previous level of engagement with estate matters while also being an adequate mother to Caroline." "I am wondering whether I should," Vera replied, setting down the papers. "I am wondering whether genuine motherhood requires the kind of complete devotion that society suggests, or whether I can be an adequate mother while also remaining engaged with meaningful work beyond childcare." "You will determine your own answer to that question," Lucas replied, settling himself in the chair beside her. "However, I will tell you that I have no expectation that you should abandon the intellectual work and the community engagement that have become significant components of your identity. I believe you are capable of integrating all of these elements, motherhood, household management, community engagement, into a life that remains genuinely meaningful. Caroline will benefit from having a mother who models engaged participation in the world, and the estate and the community will benefit from your continued attention to matters beyond the nursery." The days immediately following Caroline's birth existed in a suspended space that seemed to operate according to different temporal laws than ordinary existence. Vera was aware of time passing, dawn arriving, midnight descending, meals being served, yet the progression felt dreamlike and disconnected from her normal comprehension of duration and sequence. Her body, having undergone the extraordinary transformation of pregnancy and the profound exertion of childbirth, communicated its damage through a vocabulary of pain and weakness that she had not anticipated, despite reasonable intellectual preparation. The physician had warned her that recovery would require weeks, that she would experience soreness, extending far beyond the immediate location of the birth, that her body would require substantial time to restore itself to functional capacity. What he had not adequately conveyed was the particular quality of vulnerability that accompanied this physical recovery. She, who had managed households and established herself as woman of capability and authority, found herself incapable of rising from bed without assistance. She, who prided herself on intellectual engagement and practical problem-solving, found her mind operating in a fog that made even simple concentration difficult. Most profoundly, she discovered that her emotional responses had undergone transformation as dramatic as her physical condition. She wept without warning, not from sadness precisely, but from the overwhelming intensity of the combination of exhaustion, pain, and the profound love that she was experiencing toward the small human being that she had produced. Lucas did not leave her chambers during the first 3 days following Caroline's birth. He remained present through the long nights when Vera was required to nurse the child, when pain prevented comfortable sleep, when her body's processes required attention and management. He assisted with the physical necessities of recovery that decency prevented other attendants from managing. He spoke to her with quiet encouragement, reminding her repeatedly that the intensity of the pain and weakness was temporary, that her body would gradually restore itself, that thousands of women had endured this same experience and had recovered. "I am diminished," Vera said on the 3rd day following the birth, regarding her reflection in the looking-glass with something approaching despair. Her body was no longer pregnant, yet it was not restored to its previous condition. Her belly, though substantially reduced from its pre-birth state, remained distended. Her breasts, enlarged and tender from nursing, seemed disproportionate to her overall frame. Her face was marked by exhaustion. Her hair was limp despite attempts at grooming, and her complexion seemed to have acquired the particular pallor of someone who had endured profound physical trauma. "You have given birth to our child," Lucas replied from where he stood beside her. "You have undergone one of the most profound physical experiences available to human existence. That you are not immediately restored to your previous condition is not diminishment. It is evidence of what you have accomplished." He reached toward her face, his fingers gentle as they traced the line of her cheekbone. "You are more beautiful to me now than you have ever been. You are a woman who has survived childbirth, who is nursing our child, who is gradually reclaiming her strength. That is not diminishment. That is profound capability." The recovery progressed with the particular slowness of genuine healing. By the end of the 2nd week, Vera was capable of sitting upright for extended periods without excessive discomfort. By the 3rd week, she was able to move about her chambers without assistance, though the physical effort required was considerably greater than she anticipated. By the 4th week, she was beginning to venture into the hallways and adjacent chambers, each expedition requiring careful management of her still limited energy. Throughout this recovery, Caroline remained the center of the household's attention. The infant's particular needs, feeding approximately every 3 hours, the inevitable complications of learning to nurse, the periodic distress that characterized normal infant development, structured the household's rhythms far more completely than any schedule that Vera had previously established. Vera discovered that nursing her daughter created a particular intimacy that transcended the intellectual or even the physical affection she had developed toward Lucas. The child, who was entirely dependent upon her, who required her physical presence for survival, seemed to anchor Vera to a profound sense of purpose that extended beyond household management or intellectual engagement. This was her daughter, this human being, entirely separate from herself yet entirely dependent upon her, represented the ultimate extension of her existence and her commitment. Yet, she also discovered that motherhood created unexpected complications to her sense of identity. She had approached motherhood intellectually, understood that it was a role she would undertake as part of her responsibilities as wife and duchess. She had not anticipated the manner in which love for this child would reorganize her priorities and her sense of what constituted meaningful work. She had been accustomed to measuring her value through intellectual accomplishment, through management of complex household systems, through the establishment of community programs, and the restoration of Ravenswood's prominence. Now she found herself measuring value equally through the capacity to soothe her daughter's distress, to provide nourishment, to witness the child's gradual emergence as a person with particular preferences and personality. By the middle of August, As Vera's physical recovery was progressing sufficiently that she could spend extended periods in Caroline's nursery without excessive pain, she found herself confronting the question of how to reintegrate her maternal role with the other responsibilities that constituted her position as Duchess. "You are concerned about household management," Lucas observed, finding her one afternoon engaged in reviewing accounts from the nursery chair while Caroline slept beside her. "You are wondering whether you can maintain your previous level of engagement with estate matters while also being an adequate mother to Caroline." "I am wondering whether I should," Vera replied, setting down the papers. "I am wondering whether genuine motherhood requires the kind of complete devotion that society suggests, or whether I can be an adequate mother while also remaining engaged with meaningful work beyond childcare." "You will determine your own answer to that question," Lucas replied, settling himself in the chair beside her. "However, I will tell you that I have no expectation that you should abandon the intellectual work and the community engagement that have become significant components of your identity. I believe you are capable of integrating all of these elements, motherhood, household management, community engagement, into a life that remains genuinely meaningful. Caroline will benefit from having a mother who models engaged participation in the world, and the estate and the community will benefit from your continued attention to matters beyond the nursery." By late August, Vera had recovered sufficient physical capability that she could undertake light household management activities without experiencing excessive pain or setback in her recovery. Mrs. Hartwell had maintained the household with considerable competence during Vera's confinement, yet Vera found herself wanting to resume active engagement with the management systems that she had established. She began slowly, reviewing accounts in the morning before feeding Caroline, consulting with the head gardener regarding preparations for autumn cultivation, meeting with the head of the village school program to assess the progress of students during her absence. Each activity required careful management of her limited energy, yet the engagement itself seemed to facilitate her physical recovery, providing her with purpose and intellectual stimulation that extended beyond the essential but repetitive tasks of infant care. Caroline, meanwhile, was developing the particular personality that characterized her individual humanity. By 2 months of age, the infant had moved beyond the purely reflexive responses of earliest infancy toward behaviors that suggested emerging awareness and preference. She responded to Vera's voice with particular attention. She demonstrated clear preference for being held in certain positions. She was developing the social smile that was beginning to produce responses in the household staff far beyond what the infant's actual intellectual capability merited. It was during the first week of September, as Vera sat in the morning room reviewing estate accounts, that Lucas entered with news that seemed to signal a significant transition in her recovery and her return to fuller participation in the life of the household. "The village school instructor has requested consultation regarding Caroline's future education," he announced, settling himself beside her with evident amusement at the situation. "Apparently the woman has developed the conviction that you will wish for our daughter to receive the same quality of education that you provide to the village children. She wishes to discuss curriculum and educational methodology in anticipation of Caroline's eventual enrollment." "Caroline is barely 3 months of age," Vera responded, though she could not suppress the small smile that emerged at the notion. "Educational discussions seem premature. The woman appears to regard preparation as necessary," Lucas replied. "I told her that she should address her concerns directly to you, as decisions regarding Caroline's education would be established through discussion between us. However, I confess I find the woman's expectation that our daughter will eventually engage in systematic education rather than merely receive the passive training that characterized female education during our mother's generation to be remarkably forward-thinking." The conversation proved to be catalyst for broader reflection regarding what Vera's vision for Caroline's development would actually encompass. She had been raised in the conventional manner, educated by Governess in the skills and knowledge that were deemed appropriate for women of her class, trained in the social proprieties and domestic management that characterized adult feminine responsibility. She had, through her own particular combination of intellectual capability and fortunate circumstance, transcended the limitations that such education was designed to impose. Yet she wondered whether Caroline might benefit from education more consciously designed to develop her intellectual capabilities, regardless of the ultimately limited sphere in which a woman of her class would be permitted to exercise those capabilities. Should Caroline inherit her mother's intelligence, confining that intelligence through conventional female education would constitute a particular form of waste. By October, as summer transitioned toward autumn, Vera had resumed nearly full engagement with the management of the household and estate. She maintained careful balance between her maternal responsibilities and her other roles, rising early to spend private time nursing and interacting with Caroline before the day's other obligations commenced, maintaining ongoing engagement with estate management and community programs that had become significant components of her position. What she discovered, somewhat to her surprise, was that rather than these roles competing with each other, they seemed to inform and enhance each other. Her engagement with motherhood deepened her commitment to the community school as she began thinking about what education would actually mean for the next generation. Her continued management of the household and estate created opportunities to demonstrate to Caroline, as the child grew older, the particular satisfaction that came from meaningful work and the exercise of capability. Lady Margaret, who remained in residence at Ravenswood as the autumn progressed, observed this integration of roles with evident approval. "You have accomplished something quite remarkable," the Dowager Duchess remarked one afternoon in late October, as she watched Vera simultaneously engage in correspondence with the village school instructor while monitoring Caroline's afternoon feeding. "You have not abandoned the intellectual work and the position of responsibility that you have established. You have integrated motherhood into a life that continues to encompass meaningful engagement beyond the nursery. This is precisely what genuine partnership should enable. I had not anticipated how completely motherhood would occupy my emotional capacity," Vera admitted. "Yet I also find that it has not diminished my interest in other work, but rather has provided different foundation for it. I think of Caroline when I consider the school program. What world will she inherit if I do not maintain engagement with the welfare of our community? I think of her future when I work on household management. What kind of home am I creating for her to grow within?" "Precisely," Lady Margaret agreed. "You have understood something that many women never achieve, that motherhood and other forms of meaningful engagement are not oppositional, but rather complementary. Your daughter will benefit from having a mother who demonstrates that women are capable of multiple forms of contribution simultaneously." By the approaching end of autumn, Caroline had begun to interact more actively with the world around her. She was tracking objects with her eyes, beginning to respond to attempts at communication with sounds that suggested burgeoning language comprehension. Vera found herself engaged in the particular fascination of watching another human being develop personality and capability week by week. Lucas, observing this engagement, had begun joking privately about the manner in which Caroline seemed to be recapitulating the same process of intellectual development that had characterized her mother's emergence as educator. "She will likely teach the village children by age 8, he remarked one evening, as they observed Caroline attempting to grasp objects placed before her. "She appears to be inheriting your commitment to the development of others' capabilities, along with your intelligence. She is inheriting your reserve and your particular watchfulness," Vera replied, noting the infant's careful observation of people and objects before engaging with them. "She is a compilation of both of us, emerging into her own particular selfhood." By late August, Vera had recovered sufficient physical capability that she could undertake light household management activities without experiencing excessive pain or setback in her recovery. Mrs. Hartwell had maintained the household with considerable competence during Vera's confinement, yet Vera found herself wanting to resume active engagement with the management systems that she had established. She began slowly, reviewing accounts in the morning before feeding Caroline, consulting with the head gardener regarding preparations for autumn cultivation, meeting with the head of the village school program to assess the progress of students during her absence. Each activity required careful management of her limited energy, yet the engagement itself seemed to facilitate her physical recovery, providing her with purpose and intellectual stimulation that extended beyond the essential but repetitive tasks of infant care. Caroline, meanwhile, was developing the particular personality that characterized her individual humanity. By 2 months of age, the infant had moved beyond the purely reflexive responses of earliest infancy toward behaviors that suggested emerging awareness and preference. She responded to Vera's voice with particular attention. She demonstrated clear preference for being held in certain positions. She was developing the social smile that was beginning to produce responses in the household staff far beyond what the infant's actual intellectual capability merited. It was during the first week of September, as Vera sat in the morning room reviewing estate accounts, that Lucas entered with news that seemed to signal a significant transition in her recovery and her return to fuller participation in the life of the household. The village school instructor has requested consultation regarding Caroline's future education, he announced, settling himself beside her with evident amusement at the situation. Apparently, the woman has developed the conviction that you will wish for our daughter to receive the same quality of education that you provide to the village children. She wishes to discuss curriculum and educational methodology in anticipation of Caroline's eventual enrollment. Caroline is barely 3 months of age, Vera responded, though she could not suppress the small smile that emerged at the notion. Educational discussions seem premature. The woman appears to regard preparation as necessary, Lucas replied. I told her that she should address her concerns directly to you, as decisions regarding Caroline's education would be established through discussion between us. However, I confess I find the woman's expectation that our daughter will eventually engage in systematic education rather than merely receive the passive training that characterized female education during our mother's generation to be remarkably forward-thinking. The conversation proved to be catalyst for broader reflection regarding what Vera's vision for Caroline's development would actually encompass. She had been raised in the conventional manner, educated by Governess in the skills and knowledge that were deemed appropriate for women of her class, trained in the social proprieties and domestic management that characterized adult feminine responsibility. She had, through her own particular combination of intellectual capability and fortunate circumstance, transcended the limitations that such education was designed to impose. Yet she wondered whether Caroline might benefit from education more consciously designed to develop her intellectual capabilities, regardless of the ultimately limited sphere in which a woman of her class would be permitted to exercise those capabilities. Should Caroline inherit her mother's intelligence, confining that intelligence through conventional female education would constitute a particular form of waste. By October, as summer transitioned toward autumn, Vera had resumed nearly full engagement with the management of the household and estate. She maintained careful balance between her maternal responsibilities and her other roles, rising early to spend private time nursing and interacting with Caroline before the day's other obligations commenced, maintaining ongoing engagement with estate management and community programs that had become significant components of her position. What she discovered, somewhat to her surprise, was that rather than these roles competing with each other, they seemed to inform and enhance each other. Her engagement with motherhood deepened her commitment to the community school as she began thinking about what education would actually mean for the next generation. Her continued management of the household and estate created opportunities to demonstrate to Caroline, as the child grew older, the particular satisfaction that came from meaningful work and the exercise of capability. Lady Margaret, who remained in residence at Ravenswood as the autumn progressed, observed this integration of roles with evident approval. You have accomplished something quite remarkable, the Dowager Duchess remarked one afternoon in late October, as she watched Vera simultaneously engage in correspondence with the village school instructor while monitoring Caroline's afternoon feeding. You have not abandoned the intellectual work and the position of responsibility that you have established. You have integrated motherhood into a life that continues to encompass meaningful engagement beyond the nursery. This is precisely what genuine partnership should enable. I had not anticipated how completely motherhood would occupy my emotional capacity, Vera admitted. Yet I also find that it has not diminished my interest in other work, but rather has provided different foundation for it. I think of Caroline when I consider the school program. What world will she inherit if I do not maintain engagement with the welfare of our community? I think of her future when I work on household management. What kind of home am I creating for her to grow within? Precisely, Lady Margaret agreed. You have understood something that many women never achieve, that motherhood and other forms of meaningful engagement are not oppositional, but rather complementary. Your daughter will benefit from having a mother who demonstrates that women are capable of multiple forms of contribution simultaneously. By the approaching end of autumn, Caroline had begun to interact more actively with the world around her. She was tracking objects with her eyes, beginning to respond to attempts at communication with sounds that suggested burgeoning language comprehension. Vera found herself engaged in the particular fascination of watching another human being develop personality and capability week by week. Lucas, observing this engagement, had begun joking privately about the manner in which Caroline seemed to be recapitulating the same process of intellectual development that had characterized her mother's emergence as educator. "She will likely teach the village children by age 8, he remarked one evening, as they observed Caroline attempting to grasp objects placed before her. "She appears to be inheriting your commitment to the development of others' capabilities, along with your intelligence. She is inheriting your reserve and your particular watchfulness," Vera replied, noting the infant's careful observation of people and objects before engaging with them. "She is a compilation of both of us, emerging into her own particular selfhood." As autumn progressed toward winter, Vera found herself increasingly confident in her capacity to manage the multiple dimensions of her role as Duchess, mother, and community leader. The anxiety that had characterized the early months following Caroline's birth had gradually diminished, replaced by the particular confidence that came from demonstrating through action that integration of these roles was not merely possible, but could be managed with competence and even grace. The village school program, which had been Vera's particular initiative prior to her marriage and pregnancy, had expanded considerably during the months of her recovery. The advanced students she had been instructing had begun demonstrating genuine intellectual development and capability. Several had, under her mentorship, begun assisting the primary school instructor with younger students, thereby extending Vera's educational influence throughout the village despite her divided attention. Caroline, approaching 6 months of age, had become an increasingly predictable presence within the household. She slept more regularly, allowing Vera extended periods for other activities. She was developing greater capability to entertain herself, though her entertainment primarily consisted of observing others engaged in their activities and attempting to interact with objects and people around her. It was during a particularly cold afternoon in early December that Lucas proposed something unexpected. He had arranged for a small gathering at Ravenswood, not the extensive Christmas gathering that had characterized previous years, but rather a modest assembly of significant acquaintances and neighboring families. The occasion was ostensibly to introduce Caroline to wider society, yet Vera recognized that Lucas was making a statement through this invitation. "I want society to understand that our marriage has produced genuine partnership," he said, when Vera questioned the propriety of social engagement that centered upon an infant. "I want the world to observe that you are not merely the wife attached to my position, but rather you are a woman who has established your own significance within this household and this community. I want to demonstrate that motherhood has not diminished you, but rather has become another dimension of the work you are already engaged in." The gathering, which occurred on a Saturday afternoon in the second week of December, proceeded with the particular quality of careful observation that characterized aristocratic social interaction. Society was simultaneously curious regarding the Duchess they had encountered during the London season and regarding the child she had produced. They were, Vera sensed, attempting to assess whether her marriage had been successful, whether she had genuinely become the Duchess, or whether she remained fundamentally a governess elevated through marriage to a position that was ultimately unsuitable for her. Vera received them with the particular combination of warmth and authority that had come to characterize her management of social situations. She discussed the village school program with genuine enthusiasm, demonstrating the particular satisfaction that came from meaningful work. She discussed estate management with the confidence of someone who understood the complexities involved. She presented Caroline to her guests with neither apologetic diminishment of her daughter's significance nor defensive emphasis on the child's importance. Most significantly, when society attempted to position her according to conventional understanding, as woman elevated through marriage, as mother whose primary identity was now defined by maternal role, she gently but firmly resisted these categorizations. She was the Duchess. She was also an educator, an administrator of complex household systems, a woman engaged in community development and improvement. She was a mother, but motherhood was one dimension of her identity rather than its totality. As the gathering concluded and guests began their departures, Vera observed Lucas watching her with the particular intensity that suggested profound regard. Later that evening, as they settled themselves in the study following Caroline's bedtime, he expressed directly what had been evident in his observation, I have come to realize something quite fundamental regarding our marriage, he began, without preamble. When I arranged our marriage, I was motivated by practical necessity and by the recognition of who you had been 10 years earlier. What I have discovered through living alongside you these past months is that I love the woman you have become, not merely in continuation of who you were, but in response to who you actually are now. Vera found herself setting down the book she had been occupied with and turning her full attention toward him. That is a remarkable thing to articulate, she said carefully. It requires articulation, Lucas replied, because I recognize that I have never explicitly told you that I love you. Not in the sense of declaration, but in the sense of genuine commitment and choice. I love you, Vera. I choose you. I would choose you again if given the opportunity to make that choice with complete knowledge of who you are and what you might demand of me. He paused, gathering himself for continuation. I love you because you are intelligent and capable. I love you because you approach the work of creating a meaningful life with the same diligence and integrity that I observe in all your activities. I love you because you love our daughter without losing sight of the other important work that gives your life meaning and purpose. I love you because you have transformed Ravenswood from a residence of obligation into an actual home. Vera found that her eyes had filled with tears, tears that seemed to encompass not merely emotional response to his declaration, but also recognition of how completely her own feelings had transformed across the months of their marriage. I love you as well, she said, her voice carrying the weight of genuine feeling. I came to you from practical necessity, expecting nothing beyond respectful partnership. What I have discovered is that genuine partnership has become the foundation for something approaching the romantic love that society claims should precede marriage. I was wrong, or perhaps society was wrong. Love built through recognition of another person's actual character, through demonstration of genuine care and commitment, through the slow accumulation of shared experience and mutual understanding. This is perhaps a more durable foundation than romantic passion ever could be. She reached toward him, taking his hand. I love you because you have demonstrated that you genuinely regard me as a person of significance. I love you because you have not attempted to confine me within the limitations that marriage could impose. I love you because you are capable of transformation and growth despite the damage that war has created. I love you, Lucas, in the particular way that comes from knowing you thoroughly and choosing to build something of genuine value with you. The celebration of Caroline's first birthday, in July of the year following her birth, occurred against the background of Ravenswood in full summer bloom. The gardens, which had been steadily restored and expanded throughout the 2 years of Vera's management, had finally achieved the state of mature beauty that suggested both the estate's historical heritage and the continued development that her vision had created. The occasion was marked by a modest gathering, family and significant acquaintances who had come to know the couple and their household across the preceding months. Lady Margaret had arrived with considerable advance notice, bringing gifts for Caroline and offering to assist with the arrangements that celebrating a 1-year-old required. Viscount Edward had been invited, and to Vera's surprise, had accepted with genuine warmth in his letter of acceptance, suggesting that he was gradually moving past the resentment that had characterized his initial response to his brother's marriage. It was during the quiet moments before the gathering commenced, as Vera was dressing for the celebration and Lucas was adjusting his own appearance, that he raised the subject that had seemingly been absent from their conscious discussion for months. "Do you ever think about the fact that I was your student?" he asked suddenly, his voice carrying a peculiar quality of vulnerability. "Do you ever regard the revelation that I remembered you across years, that I deliberately arranged our marriage based on that memory, as something that actually troubles you?" Vera paused in the process of arranging her hair, a gesture now considerably simpler than it had been when managing the elaborate styles that fashion had demanded during her previous employment. "Not with the regularity I imagine you suspect," she replied, turning to regard him directly. "I have thought about it extensively, particularly in the early months following your disclosure. I recognized at that time that the revelation complicated our relationship in ways that required processing and understanding. And now," he prompted, "now I recognize that the relationship between student and teacher was meaningful but temporary," Vera continued. "You were a child of unusual intelligence confined within circumstances that constrained that intelligence. I was a young woman engaged in work that permitted me to recognize what you were capable of becoming. That relationship shaped both of us, Yet it does not define the partnership we have built as adults. She moved toward him, taking his hands in hers. The man who arranged our marriage was not the boy who was my student. You are a man who has lived through war, who carries scars both visible and invisible, who has learned through difficult experience what constitutes genuine partnership and authentic connection. The fact that memory of my presence in your childhood influenced your decision to seek me out as an adult does not diminish the choice that we have both made to build something genuine together. I have wondered, Lucas admitted, whether my original attraction to you was founded upon something inappropriate, whether I was attempting to recreate something that belonged in the past, rather than building something that could exist in the present. I have wondered whether you accepted our marriage despite the revelation, or whether you have truly integrated it into your understanding of our partnership. I have integrated it, Vera replied with certainty. I have come to understand that genuine partnership does not require that we deny our histories or pretend that our previous connections never shaped who we have become. You were my student. That shaped you. I was your teacher. That shaped me. And now, we are adults engaged in genuine partnership, and that is what matters. The celebration of Caroline's first birthday proceeded with the modest joy that characterized family gatherings. The child, aware primarily of the attention being directed toward her, and fascinated by the colorful ribbons and decorative elements that had been arranged for her entertainment, navigated the occasion with the particular unself-consciousness of infancy. Lady Margaret spent considerable time with her granddaughter, demonstrating the pride of a woman who had produced a line of inheritance that was continuing into new generations. Viscount Edward, surprisingly, appeared genuinely charmed by his niece, spending time engaged in the particular forms of entertainment that produced laughter and interest in a one-year-old. As evening fell and the formal celebration concluded, Vera found herself standing in the garden with Lucas, observing the sunset that was painting the landscape in colors of rose and gold. They stood together in comfortable silence, the particular ease of companionship that came from months of genuine partnership. I have been thinking, Lucas said, breaking the silence with the particular tone that indicated he had been considering something for some time, about what should come next for us. About the fact that Caroline is established, that our partnership is grounded in genuine love and mutual commitment, and that our time together could encompass far more than we have already accomplished. You are suggesting something specific, Vera observed, turning to regard him with interest. I am suggesting that we plan for another child, he said directly. I am suggesting that we approach the next phase of our partnership with the same deliberate intention that we have brought to all our previous choices. I am suggesting that we choose to expand our family, that we create additional opportunity for the continuation of what we have built together. The proposal should not have surprised her. They were well established as a couple. Their marriage had produced genuine partnership and mutual love. The estate was secure. The household was functioning with the competent management that Vera had established. There was no practical impediment to another child, and Lucas was articulating what had perhaps been implicit in their discussions for months. Yet she found herself moved by the particular quality of his proposition, that it was not merely obligation or biological inevitability, but rather a conscious choice to continue building something together. Yes, she replied, with certainty and genuine joy. Yes, I wish to have another child with you. Yes, I wish to continue building this partnership, expanding it, allowing it to develop in whatever directions genuine commitment and care might create. 2 years after Caroline's birth, Vera was occupied with the particular combinations of early pregnancy and the management of an increasingly active toddler. Caroline, now approaching 3 years of age, was developing the particular personality that suggested she would inherit her mother's intelligence and her father's careful observation of the world. She had begun learning letters and numbers, could speak in complete sentences, and had demonstrated the capacity to follow complex instructions, all developments that Vera observed with the particular satisfaction of watching her own child display the intellectual capabilities that she valued so highly. The pregnancy was different this time, arrived at through conscious choice rather than natural consequence of marriage, undertaken with genuine joy and mutual anticipation rather than the anxious acceptance that had accompanied the first. Vera approached it with the confidence of a woman who had survived childbirth and understood what her body was capable of managing. Lucas approached it with the clear recognition that he was choosing to expand their partnership intentionally, and that decision carried weight and significance beyond mere biological process. It was during a quiet afternoon in April, as Vera was reviewing accounts from the village school, now expanded to encompass not merely the basic instruction she had initially created, but also more advanced curricula designed to develop genuine capability in students of demonstrated aptitude, that she found herself reflecting on the extraordinary transformation that her life had undergone. She had been a woman of limited circumstance, constrained by the particular vulnerabilities that unmarried women faced in society. She had accepted marriage from purely practical necessity, uncertain whether genuine partnership would be possible, believing herself content with mere respect and financial security. What she had discovered was that genuine partnership could develop even in circumstances that began from practical requirement. That love, when built through consistent demonstration of care and mutual commitment and authentic engagement with another person's full humanity, could prove more durable and valuable than the romantic passion that society elevated as the ideal. That a woman could be simultaneously a wife, a mother, a household administrator, a community educator, and a person of intellectual significance. She had not abandoned the identity she possessed before marriage. Rather, she had expanded it, integrated new dimensions into it, discovered that the most meaningful aspects of her previous work as educator could continue through her engagement with Caroline's development and her ongoing work with the village school program. Lucas entered the study as she was completing her review of the school accounts, carrying with him the particular quality of contentment that had come to characterize his bearing as the war's damage had gradually been integrated into, rather than simply endured. "You are deeply engaged in contemplation," he observed, settling himself in the chair beside her. "Your countenance suggests that you are reflecting on something of particular significance." "I was thinking about how profoundly my life has been transformed," Vera replied, setting down the papers. "Not merely externally, though certainly my circumstances have changed dramatically, but internally. I have become a woman who is capable of genuine love, who can integrate multiple roles and responsibilities into a coherent identity, who can carry forward the meaningful work that characterized my previous life, even as I create something entirely new." "You have become," Lucas said with evident care regarding the precise articulation of his thought, "a woman who has demonstrated that human beings are capable of genuine transformation, that marriage need not constrain or diminish, that love can emerge from unlikely circumstances if genuine commitment and care are extended, that women are capable of far more comprehensive engagement with the world than society's conventional understanding permits." He paused, reaching toward her hand. "What I mean to say is that I am proud of you, extraordinarily proud, proud of what you have accomplished for yourself, proud of what you have created for Caroline, proud of what you have become through our partnership." "I could say the same regarding you," Vera replied. "You arrived at our marriage bearing visible scars from war and invisible damage that no physician could address. What you have demonstrated across the past 2 years is that damage and healing are not contradictory, that a man can be fundamentally altered by his experiences and still emerge toward genuine contentment and authentic connection with others." The conversation continued into evening, moving naturally toward discussion of what their expanding family would require, what sort of education they envisioned for Caroline as she matured, what hopes they held for the child approaching birth. By the time they retired for the evening, an understanding had emerged that felt as significant as any explicit declaration, that the marriage which had begun from practical necessity had become something approaching perfection. Not perfection in the sense of being without flaw or difficulty, but rather perfection in the sense of being genuinely suited to the two people engaged in it. In the months that followed, as summer progressed and autumn arrived, the household of Ravenswood continued its patterns of meaningful work and genuine partnership. Vera continued managing the household and estate, continued her engagement with the village school program, continued nurturing her daughter's intellectual development. Lucas continued his work in managing agricultural operations and the welfare of tenants, continued his engagement with community matters that affected those dependent upon his position, and they continued building a life together. Not perfect in the conventional sense, but deeply satisfying, grounded in mutual respect and genuine love, built brick by brick through consistent demonstration of care and commitment. In November, as autumn transitioned toward the approaching winter and the expected arrival of their second child, Vera found herself standing in the gardens that she and Lucas had worked to restore together. The landscape displayed the particular beauty of late autumn, the final flowers blooming despite approaching frost, the trees beginning their transition toward dormancy, the entire landscape preparing for the renewal that spring would bring. She placed her hand upon her swollen belly, feeling the child within respond to her touch. She thought of Caroline, who was likely occupied in the schoolroom with the instructor, who now worked directly under Vera's supervision. She thought of Lucas, who was occupied with business in the village. She thought of the legacy they were creating, not merely through biological production of children, but through the demonstration that women were capable of comprehensive contribution to the world, that men were capable of genuine transformation despite damage, that love could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances if genuine care and commitment were extended. The Library of Ravenswood in summer light had become the place where generations gathered to engage in the particular work that Vera regarded as most essential. 5 years following her arrival as the newly married Duchess, she occupied the familiar space with the particular authority of someone for whom intellectual development had become both work and calling. Caroline, approaching her 5th birthday, sat at a small desk positioned beside her mother's larger workspace. The child possessed her mother's particular combination of serious intelligence and her father's careful observation of the world. She was engaged in the meticulous process of copying letters, her tongue protruding slightly from her mouth in concentration as she attempted to replicate the precise formation that Vera had demonstrated. "Your R is improving considerably," Vera said, examining the letters with genuine attention. "Notice how this one is more balanced than yesterday's attempt. Your hand is learning to translate what your mind comprehends into physical form." Caroline looked up from her work, her moss-green eyes, inherited directly from her mother, carrying the particular satisfaction of someone who had accomplished something she regarded as significant. "When will I be able to read real books?" she asked, her vocabulary and sentence construction already demonstrating the results of 5 years of deliberate education. "Soon," Vera replied, reaching toward the shelf above where she had positioned several volumes intended for advanced young readers. "Your reading capability is progressing rapidly, and your comprehension of individual letters and simple words is now sufficient that we can begin combining them into more substantial works. Within several months, I believe you will be capable of reading genuine stories." In the adjacent room, separated by the open doorway that permitted Vera to maintain awareness of both children, James Ashford, age 3, and possessing the particular determination that characterized children of that age, was engaged in the considerably less systematic work of exploring picture books with the assistance of a governess who had been hired specifically to provide Caroline with instruction while managing James's developmental needs. James had inherited his father's coloring and his father's particular quality of watchfulness, yet he had also inherited Vera's tendency toward intellectual curiosity, and he frequently abandoned the simple picture books in favor of attempting to reach the higher shelves where real books were located. Lucas entered the library, as he frequently did during afternoon hours, a time he had deliberately preserved for engagement with his family rather than occupying it with estate business. He moved quietly so as not to disturb Caroline's concentration, settling himself in the chair that had become his habitual position when he wished to observe his family engaged in their work. "Your daughter is approaching the level of literacy at which she will be capable of engaging with the same texts that you yourself studied at her age," he observed, his voice soft enough not to interrupt Caroline's work. "Which is to say she will be reading at a level that would have been regarded as extraordinary for a girl of her years in most households." "She has inherited your intelligence," Vera replied, continuing to monitor Caroline's work while remaining aware of her husband's presence. "And she has been fortunate to receive intentional education rather than merely the passive acquisition of accomplishments that characterized my own childhood. Had I received such deliberate instruction in my youth, I might have advanced even further than I have managed." "You have advanced considerably," Lucas replied, his tone carrying the particular warmth that had come to characterize his regard toward her across 5 years of genuine partnership. "You have established yourself as a woman of comprehensive significance. The village school program has expanded to encompass 3 instructors and has produced multiple students who have demonstrated sufficient capability to secure employment or apprenticeships that would have been impossible without the education you provided. The estate is being managed with a sophistication that would not have been possible under my solo management. Caroline is receiving education that will permit her to develop capabilities that extend far beyond the conventional limitations imposed upon women of her class." He paused, his grey-blue eyes marked by the visible scar that had come to seem simply a characteristic of his appearance, carrying the particular intensity of someone observing something he valued profoundly. You have accomplished across 5 years what many women achieve only if they live significantly longer and possess considerably more favorable circumstances than you initially possessed. You have demonstrated, through your own life, that transformation is possible, that women are capable of far more comprehensive contribution than society's conventional understanding permits. Caroline, observing that she had lost her mother's attention, looked up from her letter practice. "Papa," she said with the particular formality that she often employed when addressing her father, "will you read to James while Mother helps me with my letters? He keeps attempting to reach the books above his reach, and I believe he is occupied primarily with frustration rather than genuine interest in the stories themselves." Lucas rose immediately, moving toward the adjacent room where James had indeed abandoned his picture books and was engaged in the somewhat futile effort of climbing the chair to reach higher shelves. "Your son," Vera observed as Lucas scooped James into his arms, "is attempting to establish himself as intellectual pursuer at an age when most children are still primarily occupied with simple physical exploration." "He is attempting to establish himself as entirely like his father," Lucas replied, settling himself in the comfortable chair with James, who had immediately begun pointing imperiously at books he wished his father to produce. "Independent, determined, attempting to reach beyond his current capacity. He will require considerable patience to channel that determination toward productive rather than destructive ends." The afternoon continued in the particular rhythm that had come to characterize the household's engagement with intellectual work and family connection. Vera worked with Caroline on increasingly sophisticated reading texts. Lucas engaged James with picture books that the child manipulated with considerable force and enthusiasm. Mrs. Hartwell provided tea and biscuits at the appointed hour, and the household staff moved quietly through the corridors, maintaining the estate's fundamental operations. By evening, as the household settled toward the dinner hour, the children were occupied with preparation for bed, while Lucas and Vera took their customary walk through the gardens. The landscape displayed the particular beauty of summer, flowers blooming with the vigor that came from careful cultivation and sufficient moisture, pathways that had been restored and expanded to encompass new territories for exploration and reflection. "I have been thinking about something," Lucas said as they moved along the formal garden paths, "about the fact that our partnership began with considerable uncertainty regarding whether genuine connection would be possible between us. About the fact that you arrived at Ravenswood as a woman of practical necessity, uncertain regarding whether you could genuinely adapt to the position of Duchess. About the fact that we have gradually built something that extends far beyond what either of us initially anticipated." "Yes," Vera replied, her hand resting upon his arm in the familiar gesture that had become habitual across years of companionship. "I have reflected on the same progression frequently. I have thought about the woman I was 5 years ago, uncertain of my capabilities, anxious regarding my future, accepting marriage as the most sensible alternative available to me. And I have thought about the woman I have become, confident in my abilities, engaged in meaningful work that extends far beyond household management, a wife and mother and educator and community leader." "You have become," Lucas said carefully as though articulating something that required precise language, "a woman who demonstrates through your own life that women are capable of genuine transformation, of comprehensive contribution, of multiple simultaneous roles and identities. You have demonstrated that genuine partnership can develop even in circumstances that begin from practical necessity. You have shown our daughter, and soon James will understand this as well, that women are capable of far more than society's conventional understanding permits." They continued their walk in companionable silence, moving through the gardens that they had worked together to restore. Behind them, the house stood illuminated against the gathering dusk, warm light emanating from windows that suggested the continued activity of household members engaged in the work of maintaining their world. The story that had begun with a mysterious letter and a practical proposal had transformed into something approaching the completion of a genuine life, not perfect in the conventional sense, but profoundly satisfying in ways that transcended romantic passion or social position. It was the story of two people who had chosen, day after day and year after year, to build something of genuine value together. And it was a story that would continue, in the education that Caroline and James would receive, in the impact that Vera would continue to have upon the community and the estate. in the partnership that Lucas and Vera would continue to develop and strengthen across whatever years remained available to them. The Duchess of Ravenswood, who had once been a governess and who had been given in marriage without knowing the identity of the man she would marry, had not merely survived the transformation. She had transcended it. She had become a woman of genuine significance, not through marriage alone, but through her own deliberate choices and the capabilities she had demonstrated. And that, perhaps, was the truest form of transformation that any life could undergo. Thank you for spending these hours with us as we followed the extraordinary journey of Vera and Lucas Ashford across the first 5 years of their partnership. Thank you for witnessing how a woman given in marriage to a stranger became the Duchess through genuine capability and authentic love. Thank you for observing how a war-damaged man found healing through connection with another person who saw him fully and chose him deliberately. If this story has moved your heart, if you found yourself invested in Vera's transformation, if you were moved by Lucas's journey toward healing, if you recognized in their partnership something valuable about what genuine love can accomplish, we invite you to join us. Please subscribe to Victorian Romance audio stories. Please comment below and tell us which moment affected you most profoundly. Which revelation surprised you? Which scene caused your heart to catch? Which aspect of Vera and Lucas's partnership resonated with your own understanding of what genuine love requires? Share this story with someone who still believes that love can flourish even in unlikely circumstances. Share it with someone who values historical romance. Share it with someone who needs to remember that transformation is possible. Our next story awaits. Another woman, another journey, another path toward love and partnership and the creation of genuine legacy. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for being part of the Victorian Romance audio stories community.